The manga opens on a burning fortress, or rather, its last line of defense. The warriors of the Kingdom of Grandis have clashed with an army of orcs who are clearly winning and are already climbing the walls of the fortress. Commanders call upon Endeavor's soldiers. No, not this one. Fight to the end and not give up despite their dire situation. The orc leaders do the same, only in their own language. Among the orcs, there are shamans who cast spells on their own warriors. This causes the orcs on the front lines to go into a berserk state. The guard at the top of the tower notices this. He concludes that the question of the fall of the southern gate is only a matter of time. But the orc lord, their strongest warrior, did not even enter the battle. Unlike the previous orc commanders, this one is a master of aura and an extremely dangerous opponent. He can use special skills due to his excellent aura control. Simply put, anyone can be a stand user. The orc army has already captured the walls of the fortress, except for the southern wall. At the cost of their lives, human commanders call on their soldiers to defend the fortress. The orcs continue to crush the corpses of the soldiers. While their dead bodies begin to glow with a greenish color, dead human warriors are beginning to rise, and even their commanders don't understand what's happening. In addition to human corpses, orc corpses also rise. When an army of dead orcs and humans attacks orcs in a berserk state, the survivors realize that there is a necromancer on the battlefield. In the midst of this riot, a huge explosion occurs. The orc commander has finally entered the fray. He confronts the very same necromancer who appeared on the battlefield. The necromancer understands that this orc cannot be defeated with mere corpses. As expected from stand use, aura masters. Therefore, he summons high-class undead that come out of purple portals. Using his aura, the orc chieftain fights off the hordes of corpses attacking him, while the high-class corpses newly summoned by the necromancer attack him directly. He dodges a blow from the skeleton swordsman, but he falls under the claws of a huge beast-like creature. The skeleton and the huge cat strike the orc one after another. Finally, the beast-like one manages to break through the enemy's defense. With his blow, he throws the orc back. The necromancer fights separately from his summoned creatures. He is an excellent swordsman, which is unusual for magicians. Also fighting on his side is a huge titan, which easily cuts even the largest orcs in half. The dead fairy also guards with them. With the help of her magic and speed, she quickly deals with enemies. Under its influence, they are simply torn to pieces. The surviving human warriors are amazed at how the necromancer single-handedly turned the tide of battle. And he fights on the light side, despite the fact that the Empire has banned black magic. The main orc is no less surprised. He did not expect that he would be stopped by simple corpses. But they are not enough to defeat him completely. The necromancer wants to take possession of the body of this orc. His abilities are worthy of making the chieftain one of the black magician's comrades. Using a bone whip, the mage attacks the orc directly. Stand, that is, the embodiment of his enemy's aura, intercepts the attack. The orc chieftain counterattacks the necromancer, who defends himself with his sword. As a result of their collision, a huge explosion occurs. To block the ogre's attack, the green-haired necromancer summoned a huge skeleton consisting of several creatures. Even the shield he summoned cannot withstand the force of the leader's blow and shatters into pieces. The necromancer understands that to confront such opponents, he himself must be even stronger, for the sake of my own survival, and for the sake of those who are dear to him. The necromancer uses his last trump card and covers his body with bone armor. The warlike ogre chieftain acknowledges his rival. He understands that this is his last battle, and asks the hero to send him to Valhalla. The necromancer rushes towards him, dealing blow after blow. This knocks the orc off his feet and sends him flying. While in the air, both warriors prepare to deliver the final blow. The events leading up to this battle began in the academy, Rodlin. It is the most prestigious academy in the entire empire. Both the greatest talents and obscure personalities gather here. In a dark and damp basement with mountains of corpses, two such individuals are just going about their business. Green-haired Andreas and his teacher. Andreas forgot where the corpse he had been working on for the past week was. This is a very dangerous miscalculation for a dark magician, since if they are discovered, they will be killed immediately. That's why they conduct their necromantic experiments in secret. Andreas' teacher carries out his manipulations with another dead man. He uses magic on his body. The corpse rises into the air. However, this is not the result the man expected. He orders Andreas to clean up their work area and goes to his office. The green-haired one, however, is not bothered by this. This basement is the only place where he can read books about black magic. Andreas' teacher reproaches him for not even being able to clean up quickly, let alone work independently. The boy doesn't tell the teacher about his independent studies. Moreover, the old man doesn't teach him anything at all. Andreas promises to do everything possible to improve. And as a corrective labor, he receives a new assignment. The teacher will forgive his student to bring a fresh corpse from the cemetery. This will prove that the green-haired one is more valuable alive. Otherwise, he will simply become a body for experiments. So Andreas sets out to search for the corpse, without even enough money for travel. Leaves the office. He runs into a crowd of students. They look at the guy with surprise and disdain as he aggressively pushes his way through them. In his third year of studying in the magic department, Andreas is still considered an absolute failure. His once great family fell long ago, and the boy was left an orphan. All he could do was curry favor with the others. No one would even want to play as such a third-rate villain, as he himself reasons. However, fate decreed otherwise. In fact, Andreas is not an original protagonist. His name is Makoto, and he has been inside the game Great Sin for some time now. After participating in military missions in a special unit, the man was never able to adapt to life in society. So he played the game day and night. It was his outlet. One day, Makoto received a phone call from an unknown person who knew everything about his game character. When I tried to turn off the computer, the game started. Andreas' body in the game world. This seemed like the most hopeless situation, because according to the plot, Andreas died as soon as his identity as a necromancer was revealed, just like his teacher Sharon. And now Andreas needs to find a way to escape from Karen before the main plot of the game begins, at least to simply survive. Andreas sits on a bench near the academy, pondering his survival. He only has two special traits that are given out at the very beginning of the game and can be relied upon. The first is a dual core, which allows one to wield magic and swordsmanship at the same time. You can choose the second feature yourself. Andreas plans to choose something that will help him develop his necromancy skills. It brings up the characteristics menu. The choice is really huge. The guy decides to think about the options for skills that he has not yet played the game with. He finds the skill Evolution, which was not there before. However, this is exactly what will help him go beyond the boundaries of his own development. Almost immediately, Andreas chooses a new trait. He already understands that with Evolution, he will be able to achieve a lot. Makoto promises himself that he will definitely survive and complete the game like Andreas Cromwell, and spoils half of the plot for himself. Andreas lives in a free dormitory at the academy, like many students. When playing as other characters, he remembered himself as a third-rate villain who could barely handle elemental magic. His only strong point is necromancy, which should bear fruit in tandem with Evolution. Before heading to the cemetery on Sharon's behalf, Andreas decides to drop by their lab. The more useful things of this kind he does, the faster he will become stronger. And this will increase his chances of survival. He once again examines the books on black magic. They all have such flashy titles that Andreas will be executed as soon as they are seen. Besides the books, there is another danger lurking in this room for the guy. A vampire girl, imprisoned in a cage, being examined and experimented on by Karen. In the world of the Great Sin, vampires can tolerate sunlight normally and have strong magic. Even in the current situation, this vampire is comparable in strength to the boss from the middle of the game. As if hearing his thoughts, the captive calls out to Andreas, maybe her only hope of escape, so the girl sarcastically asks if he will help her escape. Already during his trip to the cemetery, Andreas reflects on what happened. In exchange for his help, the vampire offered to kill Karen. It sounded very tempting. After all, one day the teacher himself could kill his student. The green-haired man assumes that she decided to talk to him because she noticed a change in his behavior since Makoto took over his body. The girl swears that she will not kill Andreas himself, but he does not trust her. He doesn't believe that a superior being like her would keep her promise to a mere human. Besides, if the guy betrays Karen now, he could get himself into big trouble. So he comes to the conclusion that it would be worthwhile to study more information about vampires in his spare time. Heading to the cemetery, Andreas barely drags his cloak. Since he is a magician, physical exercise is difficult for him. Upon entering the National Cemetery, the boy introduces himself as the third grandson of a certain Jenny. In addition to the fake name, he adds a password, 13 azure irises, after which the guy is let through. The cemetery worker had already dug up the body he had ordered for him. A still fresh knight appears before him in a coffin. Now it will be even harder to carry the suitcase. After finishing packing the body, Andreas notices a familiar name on the tombstone. After racking his brains, he finally remembers the name of the Aura Master, Nickel Lifehill. Although now it's more like in Life Hill. During his lifetime, this man devoted decades to studying the way of the sword. Despite the dangerous craft and the refinement in the use of aura, Nickel died of old age right during training. It was one of the game's Easter eggs, the meaning of which Makoto never understood. However, within the game itself, the characters are unaware that Nickel has posthumously become an aura master. If you create a Death Knight from a swordsman, he will be a truly deadly weapon. But even Karen doesn't have the skills to do that at the moment. Although if the evolution skill shows itself at its best, then perhaps Andreas will come up with something worthwhile. Seeing his interest, Paimon, the cemetery worker, immediately refuses. Besides, the guy doesn't have permission from Karen for a second body. To bribe Paimon, Andreas offers him his ring. It is a Cromwell family heirloom, engraved with the seal of the Earl, the green-haired man's late father. Paimon understands how rich he will become if he sells the ring. While he is trying to calculate all the pros and cons, Andreas puts the ring in his hand. Seeing the wealth in his hand, Paimon is unable to refuse. He digs up the ordered body for Andreas. Thanks to Nickel, the guy already sees how the outlines of his future power, which Andreas spoiled for himself yesterday, are beginning to manifest. Returning to the academy, the student hands over the knight's body to Karen. He asks him to take care of the reagents and cleaning. Andreas's body has already adapted to these tasks and moves instinctively, which irritates him. He tries to complete his teacher's assignments as quickly as possible in order to begin the ritual over Nickel. With his current abilities, a novice necromancer will only be able to summon a skeleton. He understands that he will be able to evolve faster in the future with the help of the evolution trait, but he does not yet understand how it works. Andreas's thoughts are interrupted by a vampire. She was tired of waiting for him to help her escape from captivity. The girl tries to manipulate Andreas by asking if he intends to remain Karen's plaything for the rest of his life. However, Andreas himself was waiting for the vampire to start a conversation with him. He wondered how Karen was able to capture such a powerful creature. After studying books on vampire topics, everything fell into place in his head. The girl once again reminds that she promised not to kill the boy, and he has nothing to even think about. But if he continues to delay, she will not keep her word. Andreas will let her out. He himself was bored of being at his teacher's beck and call. But he has a demand. The vampire must swear on the name of her family that she will not kill Andreas. In the book he read that after such an oath, vampires can't break their promise. Although this demand surprises the vampire, she agrees and swears by the name of Lucifer. Andreas is surprised at how easy it all was. A system window pops up in front of him. Angela has a 55% chance of evolving if the guy uses his ability on her. Concluding that evolution can be used not only on creatures summoned by the Necromancer, Andreas decides to try out the ability. Even if something happens to Angela, then it won't be his problem anymore. A strong wave of pain washes over the girl. She doesn't understand what Andreas did to her. Almost immediately after the second wave follows, after which the vampire falls unconscious. Andreas does not understand whether the evolution was successful, but he understood one thing for sure. If he managed to use the ability on a random, unsummoned creature, then it would definitely work on his necromantic creations. With these conclusions, the necromancer prepares everything for the ritual. Using basic necromancy, he requests the summoning of a skeleton. Even this basic summon requires a large amount of mana. With Andreas' current stats, casting the spell is difficult for him. Skin, muscles, and whatever else is left of Nickel's corpse are peeling off, leaving only bones. Surrounded by a blue-green haze, the skeleton rises. The call was successful. Due to Nickel's remarkable achievements during his lifetime, he immediately transforms into a skeleton soldier. He also took over some of his self-awareness from his living self. In addition, he has the sword mastery trait. This trait is given to those who are at the peak of their skill. Nickel gestures to Andreas. From his signals, the guy understands that the skeleton is taking the green-haired man under his wing. Andreas has nothing against him. Later, sitting in his dorm room, the guy talks about his plans for the future. There is still a year left before Karen's death. In order to survive, the guy will need to do a lot of work on himself. He decides to release Nickel from his vault. Since he's just a bare skeleton for now, it would be worth adding some humanity to Nickel with clothes. Andreas' efforts, the skeleton will appear human at first glance. Dressed as a human, Nickel begins practicing sword swings, albeit without a sword. Andreas remembers an Easter egg. It says that Nickel died during training. That's why even after death he continues to train. This is only to the guy's advantage because he has the double core trait. Now he can finally start developing it. Andreas asks Nickel to teach him fencing. Since both of them don't have a sword at the moment, the training takes place with a regular stick. But despite this, Andreas's body is already creaking, responding to the unusual load. He is motivated by the fact that with the right training, the boy will be able to comprehend the aura and switch between it and mana with the dual core. If successful, Andreas will become a magical swordsman. They gather mana in the heart and aura in the Dantian stomach area. The strongest people possess this ability, including Emperor Edmund, one of the founders of the empire. Nickel pinches Andreas to bring him out of deep thought. The skeleton doesn't like that his master is distracted from training. Andreas himself does not intend to be lazy either. Makoto in his body intends to make a warrior out of him, since he himself served in the special forces in his world. At the end of the day, Andreas decides to test whether his skill in necromancy has increased. After all, today he missed a lesson on it, but at the same time he spent the whole day with the summoned Nickel. In 5 hours, his possession has risen by 2 points. In the current conditions, this is not so little. Considering that after reaching the basic necromancy level, it takes longer to level up. And Curran had not addressed his student for a long time. The vampire is still evolving and hasn't changed in appearance, which means he had no reason. The guy is confident that evolution will be successful. While Andreas is resting, Nickel continues to swing his stick. If the green-haired man had potions, he could use them to give his training a greater boost. By using a healing and regenerative potion, you can achieve an almost infinite supply of stamina. However, they are too expensive for Andreas in his current situation. Moreover, he only knows the necessary ingredients, but not their ratios. So he decides it's time to start taking potion-making classes to learn how to make his own and save a lot of money. Without thinking twice about the idea, Andreas heads to his next class. The students who noticed him whisper among themselves. They never saw the reason for their ridicule in the potions class. Andreas, of course, hears everything they say, but tries to endure it so as not to stand out. He is in his 3rd potions lesson in the intermediate herbalism course. The guy can't wait for Professor Vauban to talk about proportions. They finally reach the body reinforcement gap composition. Makoto's gaming experience begins to differ from the current events. Andreas is surprised that the professor decides to teach the students a version of the potion with multiple side effects. The guy decides to test his guesses. He remembers 2 ingredients he knows from the game and asks why the professor doesn't use them in the potion, to which he responds with absolute incomprehension. And in order to further assert himself, he suggests that Andreas go to the kitchen to prepare soup with such a set of ingredients. The guy realizes that a potion with these ingredients has not yet been invented. This means that his knowledge goes beyond the course program. One student, unlike the others, did not laugh at Andreas. She found his question interesting. Since he didn't get the information he needed in class, the green-haired one takes matters into his own hands. However, so far, he has not been able to create a potion from his ingredients. Even if he knows the composition, without the proportions, all his reserves will soon run out, and he will go bankrupt. Andreas even thinks about asking for help, but immediately dismisses this thought. No one wants to help such trash as his character. Or is he wrong after all? That same girl from the potions class finds a guy in the lab. He is surprised that the playable character interacts with him outside of the plot. The girl's name is Lucia Everlast. She is very talented in creating potions. Since she wasn't supposed to have any contact with Andreas, he decides to simply ignore her. But the girl does not leave. She is interested in the occupation of the unsuccessful potion maker. Having not received answers to her questions, Lucia understands that she will not receive any initiative from her interlocutor. So she takes matters into her own hands and offers Andreas cooperation. This is a good idea, isn't it? Although there is no point in refusing, Andreas wants to know what she wants from him. The girl doesn't see anything strange in the fact that she is looking for a partner for research, but the guy doesn't understand what is in her favor. She claims that Andreas' gratitude will be enough for her. Besides, she thinks that the guy is hiding some kind of talent and is eagerly awaiting a potion from him that doesn't yet exist. According to the game's plot, Lucia is so good at potion making because of a fatal illness, not because of any innate talent. Neither famous doctors nor professional pharmacists could help the girl, so she had to study on her own. If Makoto hadn't gone through the game inside and out, he wouldn't have been able to help Lucia. But now he knows the ingredients, even if he doesn't know the proportions. Andreas was lucky to meet the girl in such a situation. If she had found out about his black magic later, she would have easily killed him. While he is lost in his thoughts, Lucia gets to the bottom of his irritated face. Andreas suggests that she leave, as he is not interested in what is happening. Lucia hits him with a trump card. She knows the last important ingredient that the guy thought only he should know. If you add the necessary mushroom to the potion now, it might work. The girl understood this intuitively and offers her help. Andreas continues to resist. As soon as she gets what she wants, she will leave. After all, Lucia is rich. They all do that. He is afraid of losing his life because of a rash decision, but he does not voice this thought. Lucia gives him time to think. Andreas doesn't think about agreeing to the offer of cooperation. He continues to reflect on the situation during training with Nickel. He can find the proportions himself. The only problem is money. First, he needs to find a way to make money. With a sharp swing of his stick, Nickel frightens Andreas. He noticed that the guy was distracted and decided to get him back on track with his training. The green-haired man decides to think about the options available to him for earning money after training, if there are any at all. After some thought, he came to the conclusion that his only option was to ask his sister for money. This is exactly what Andreas from the game would do. An extremely rotten character. The current one is not going to resort to such a way of earning money. This time is an exception. A dark-haired girl notices a guy walking along. She finds it strange that Andreas Krovmel walks with a book in his hand. According to the events of the game, he did a lot of bad things. So the girl decides that even if he decided to change, the rotten insides will not go away. The girl's name is Diana Alvin. She is the daughter of an influential family and a brilliant sorceress. As children, she and Andreas got along well, but because of his family's debts, they stopped communicating. She is a playable character and can also kill him in the academy, just like Lucia. Anyway, now the guy's heading to his sister to ask her for money. She works in the capital in a restaurant for the nobility. Andreas felt sorry that his younger sister Ami had to work even though she was from a family of counts. She notes that such statements are not like him, but in any case, the bankruptcy of the Cromwells is not his fault. From the serious face of her brother, Ami understands that he came to ask her for money. She is not angry and has even prepared for this situation. The girl hands Andreas an envelope and asks him not to waste the money just like that. He promises to return all the money, which surprises Ami. But what strikes her even more is the absence of a family ring. At first, Andreas tries to play the fool, saying that he took off the ring so that it wouldn't get lost. But the girl understands that he is lying, and the guy breaks down. He timidly apologizes to Ami, but the girl asks her brother to leave. She agrees that Andreas will not return her money, but the main thing is that he will not show up again. The guy promises to return the ring, but his sister has already run out of the room. By selling the ring, he sold the last thing he had left as a memory of his former family. Andreas has never seen Ami so angry and upset. He decides to return the ring as soon as possible. Makoto remembers how miserable he was when he was the only survivor of his squad. There was no meaning in life. He just continued to exist alone. In order not to be left without a family in this world, he must return the ring. And to do this, he will have to agree to Lucia's proposal, which is what he does upon returning to the academy. And now they've been working together on the potion for a week now. It's true that Lucia mostly sits around doing nothing, while Andreas devotes himself entirely to training and research. However, sometimes she still joins the work, albeit briefly, but the process becomes easier and faster. Yet most of the time she chills on the couch, which irritates Andreas. And when he begins to express his dissatisfaction, Lucia gives him another clue. Reduce the amount of an ingredient here, add a new one there. Thanks to the girl's intuition, her tips often solve problems that arise. And even though Andreas was only making the potion for the money, collaborating with Lucia was actually a good idea. And now, after long hours, days, weeks of working on the potion, it finally works. Andreas creates an intermediate class body strengthening potion. And for its creation, he receives a new talent for creating potions of the strengthening type. His ability, Evolution, can also be applied to this talent. Andreas comes to the conclusion that he can develop anything with his ability if certain conditions set by the system are met. However, now the chance of evolution is 32%, which is less than in the experiment with the vampire. Therefore, the guy decides to wait with the choice. Meanwhile, Lucia is already trying out the new potion. It doesn't cause any side effects. She wants to apply to the Potions Evaluation Committee, a job Andreas leaves to the girl, since he did all the dirty work himself. The girl agrees, even if she will be busy with midterm exams from tomorrow. Along the way, she teases Andreas that this is her favor for his little help. At this time, in Karen's basement, the vampire lies without strength. There are about 15 days left until the end of her evolution. Her whole body hurts terribly, but she feels as if there is something else hidden behind this pain. Andreas, like Lucia, began midterm exams. Together with the class, he goes to the testing site. The last part of this exam will take place in the Magic Tower, but they are not going there yet. Andreas's fencing and necromancy skills have improved significantly. He doesn't need a very high score. The main thing is to just pass the exam. And after the exam, the guy will need to visit the evolved vampire. In Andreas' group, there is the same dark-haired girl we saw earlier. Her classmate asked Diana what the topic of this exam will be, in her opinion. For the test, they will be assigned to teams in a random selection. If you get into a strong team, then passing the exam will be extremely easy. Diana is confident in her abilities. Even without a strong team, she can cope. But her interlocutor threatens her with the fact that Diana could end up on the same team with Andreas. Looking at her old acquaintance who has changed dramatically, Diana reacts ambiguously. In just a minute, the train will arrive at the station where the exam will begin. The teacher asks all students to get ready to go out. The whole class pours out onto the station. The teacher repeats the rules by which the exam will be conducted. Each group will have 3 warrior students, 1 mage, and 1 observer. The task must be completed by Monday. And now the results of the so-called draw are ready. And judging by Andreas's face, he did not count on such a team. From the game, he knows that besides him and Sharon, there are many negative characters in the academy, and 2 of them ended up in his squad. The first is Khazar Gopri, who will become a cultist in the future, and the second is Vivian Belkin, who, as the story progresses, increasingly catches schizos and kills indiscriminately. Thinking about this, Makoto realizes that his luck is even worse than Andreas's original character. While he is thinking about this, another member of the group approaches him. The blue-haired guy is named Christopher. He immediately expresses his dislike for Andreas, as he trained as both a warrior and a mage, which disgusts him. After him, those same 2 villains come up. Khazar looks friendly, but Andreas already knows his true identity. Vivian only briefly introduces herself by name. But even these 3 are not the end of the group's problems. Their observer is a muscular but mannerless blonde Yankee. Her name is Ivy Claire. For now, she's just quietly smoking on the sidelines. Although, given the size of her cigarette, it's better to say she's puffing like a steam locomotive. The teacher announces that when the whole group is assembled, they can leave. As an instruction, he asks the teams to return alive, optional. Andreas is already predicting a not-so-best state of affairs with such a team. And so the team finally sets off. Ivy finally introduces herself. She is the observer of the 9th group. It is clear from Christopher that he is already afraid of her. The girl shows all the boys the bundle. It has their mission written on it, and they need to explore Baron Baloric's territory. After briefly outlining the situation regarding the missing group of people 2 weeks ago, she asks if her teammates have any questions, to which Andreas remarks that the girl is much more aggressive than in the game. In the game, she became the youngest Aura Master, and nothing else is known about her. The girl remembers Richard's words that the mud-headed one, as Andreas is called, is trying to imitate the knights. She doesn't like it either. She thinks that such attempts at imitation are just laughable. Andreas tries to put her down by saying that she eats jerky just to look cool. The girl responds to the remark by saying that this is instead of smoking, since it is prohibited on the train. If he is not happy with this, then she can gnaw at him. The team arrives at its destination. They come to the Baron's castle and notice that for an ordinary Baron, his castle is too big. On site, Baron Baloric himself greets the students. He brings them up to date, noting along the way that what happened will be a stain on his reputation. The landlord of the village they find themselves in is his nephew. He used to be a baronet without a surname, and that's where his story ends. He has no more information. However, Ivy still thanks him for at least something. After their conversation, the butler whispers in the Baron's ear. Andreas reacts to this but decides to remain silent. At this point, the Baron decides to take his leave, as some urgent matters await him. The butler apologizes to them, saying that the young master is not feeling well. Ivy replies that the information they received is enough, and they are already leaving. This causes displeasure on the butler's face, but he allows the boys to leave the room. As she heads outside, Ivy thanks Christopher for looking after the gear. Ivy notes that the Baron is too calm for a man whose nephew has disappeared. Plus, he stinks. Andreas insisted that the team leave the Baron's castle for the village today. Claire wonders why. Green-haired says that considering the situation with the missing squad, this whole situation looks suspicious and fabricated. Also, it's strange that only one group was sent out in the past month, and the butler's attitude was also strange. Back at the castle, he suggested that the team stay overnight, since it would take quite a while to get to the village. As commander-in-chief, Ivy declined at the time, citing that work came first. This is what caused the displeased expression on Dvoretsky's face. Andreas noted that he looked as if his plan had failed. Moreover, both he and the Baron initially looked worried. The guy thinks that this family is hiding something. Their task is not as simple as it may seem at first glance. On the way to the village, Christopher tries to motivate the team to find a place to stay when they arrive. But Ivy makes the investigation a priority. They plan to start their investigation from the castle of the Lord's nephew. Suddenly, Andreas feels a strange sensation in the area where Mana was released. Mana begins to tremble, and the closer they get to the village, the stronger this trembling becomes. This remark is immediately followed by a sudden acceleration of their carriage. Khazar tries to shout to the coachman, but Christopher takes the situation into his own hands. He looks out of the window to knock on the door of their coachman, but he sees that he has gone mad and is lashing the horses with a whip. The horses are also out of their minds. The carriage continues to rush at a crazy speed, gaining more and more momentum. While the boys are trying to figure out what to do, Ivy kicks down the door of the carriage. She realizes that it is too late to jump out, and everyone must prepare for impact. A little more, and they will crash into the main gate, so the guys try to group together. The carriage crashes into the main gate of the village at full speed. The coachman, sprawled on the ground, is thrown into the crowd of dancing people. They all look unhealthy, as if they had all gone crazy at once. With red eyes and drooling mouths, they dance under the light of 3 full moons. The students emerge from behind the comet and watch the events unfold. They are amazed by the madness that is happening in the main square. Christopher turns to Andreas with questions, since the wizard should most likely know what is going on. And Andreas knows, but for now he is thinking to himself. He realizes that the fact that his mana reacted to the approach of the village means that it picked up traces of black magic. A crazed child attacks the team, but Vivian quickly neutralizes him and pins him to the ground. She realizes that he is too strong for an ordinary child. Khazar notices that, because the guy was dancing all this time, his feet are covered in bloody calluses. He assumes it's a curse. However, when the quest was given, no one mentioned that it involved this kind of magic. Christopher doesn't think they've been dancing for a month straight. Otherwise, they would have died of exhaustion long ago. And Andreas notes that in that case, someone is making sure they continue to live. And this remark alarms the blue-haired knight. Andreas recalls that in this part of the game, his character did not die. However, if they had decided to stay in the butler's castle, then something would have probably happened to them, and the Baron would have hidden it. But because they refused, the events of the plot changed and they got into a dangerous situation. The mana he senses is roughly on par with Karen. However, such a vast spell at this level seems strange. Andreas comes to the conclusion that perhaps the caster has some kind of artifact in use. Christopher notices this expression on the mud-headed one, but he says that at the moment they have too little information and they should inspect the house of the village head. After all, the first step is to gather information. Arriving at his house, they see several burning corpses. Ivy, out of habit, kicks down some door, and the whole gang falls through the main entrance. They see a bunch of people killed, or they are one of those who died from fatigue. From their clothing, Christopher can tell that there are researchers from the Empire among them, and that quite a lot of time has passed since their death. Andreas turns to Ivy, saying that they may not be able to resolve this issue on their own. After all, based on what he saw, he assumes that this is the work of the Black Magician. Someone has amplified the emotions of the people here and transformed them into magical power, and Ivy confirms that the Black Mage's power is derived from people's emotions. She realizes that the landlord has probably already been killed. Christopher notes that the burning bodies at the entrance may be part of some kind of ritual, and Andreas confirms this. However, according to Ivy, they will only find out the truth when they catch the criminals, so they need to explore the estate. They are actually sent for research. Having combed the entire estate, they found nothing, not even the corpse of that very landlord. Vivian invites the crowd to look outside, and through the window, they see that a crowd of maddened villagers has come to the estate. Andreas realizes that this black mage has made his move. The zombies, if you could call them that, had already noticed the people in the windows, as if they were just waiting for them to enter the estate. Khazar asks Ivy what they should do now, and she suggests leaving the estate and asks the knight to find a way to retreat. He immediately sets off on reconnaissance, but before he reaches the stairs, he immediately runs into a crowd of madmen running towards him. Christopher rushes to his aid. He flies like a tank into the fleeing crowd, protecting Khazar. Wielding his sword, Christopher asks those gathered to protect the wizard, as he himself will be in the vanguard. After his words, someone from the crowd suddenly explodes, simultaneously killing his already not very alive teammates. Christopher is already trying to block the explosion, but he also flies away. Makoto, in Andreas' body, is overcome with PTSD from his military service. He remembers how a similar explosion threw his former comrade back. Andreas becomes ill and falls to his knees, almost unconscious. At this time, Kazara picks up and carries Christopher away, and Ivy tries to bring the mud-headed man to his senses. She can't do it, so she takes him on her shoulders and asks Vivian to knock out the window. And she, following her instructions, still kicks out the window. The entire team flies out through the broken glass and runs as far as possible into the ill-fated estate. However, behind them there is a tale of crazy disco dancers. Andreas remembers his last operation, which is what caused him to get this PTSD at the wrong time. But he somehow comes to his senses and uses a sliding spell, which helps his team break away from pursuit. He then uses an earthen shield to block the path of his pursuers. Ivy asks him not to use mana so recklessly and that he should track down the Black Mage. Andreas obeys, since the mage has released enough mana and can be easily found. Concentrating, he tries to track it by the traces of mana, and finds his current location in a certain house. Using a unit of measurement that is incomprehensible to the viewer, Andreas directs his team to 9 o'clock. The house should be 100 meters away from them. Thank goodness for the meters. Ivy is rapidly gaining speed, so much so that even her teammates ask her to wait for them. However, she is determined to break straight into the Black Magician's lair, and he already sees from the window how the students are approaching him. And again, Ivy kicks down another door. It's time to start counting. Entering inside, she believes that they are already on the right path, and this is where the Black Magician must be hiding. Suddenly, the girl gets trapped. The already doorless doorway starts to glow with a pinkish light from the barrier that the Black Magician put up. Ivy notices that they have been separated, but does not yet notice the zombie behind her. Or not a zombie, because from the bleeding girl's statement that she's in pain, and judging by the fact that she calls Ivy sister, something's wrong here. Plus, Ivy reacts in a surprising, shocked way. On the other side of the doorway, Andreas tries to do something, but realizes that he is powerless. The Black Mage's words echo in his head. He notices that they are drawn like a moth to a flame. Immediately after this, a certain area with students is closed by another barrier. The Black Magician calls upon them to bow down in the name of Sloth. Andreas doesn't understand why Len's name came up now. After all, in the game of the Great Sin, in which he is, starting with sloth, as the first of the deadly sins, all the other 7 parts, which were the codes of the apocalypse, separated from the main body. Once you have them all, you can summon the final boss. These are very important story items. Andreas's thoughts are stopped by the madmen who attack him, but he quickly retreats from them, dodging the attack. He still doesn't understand why the name of one of the apocalypse codes appeared in a village that didn't even appear in the plot. But what he understands is that he cannot cope on his own, and that he needs to unite with others. Therefore, he escapes from his pursuers by dodging. At this time, Vivian is fighting off the same pursuers, and she has already been overtaken by that schizophrenia that we mentioned earlier. True, we did not expect it to be on such a scale. Mad with rage and unable to contain her flow of saliva, the girl cuts into pieces everyone who comes near her. Khazar, next to the crippled Christopher, simply watches, because his help is not even needed here. Andreas finds them doing this. The cultist pretends to be surprised by Vivian's behavior, although he was just leaning against the wall. He says that this is the first time he sees her like this. However, Andreas immediately understands that he is hiding his true identity, and it is not for nothing that the Mudhead does not trust him. However, Andreas does not want to leave Christopher in trouble, because he is still his comrade, so he decides to play along with Khazar. He reports that their observer is trapped inside the barrier. The voice of the Black Magician reaches the team again, this time not only Andreas. He says that they are killing defenseless people. Khazar also hears a voice. Andreas says that the Black Magician is most likely near Ivy now. Khazar volunteers to go to her and asks the wizard to take care of the others. Andreas lets him go without any problems, even though the fanatic's intentions are obvious. But it's better than him stabbing them in the back. Returning to Vivian, Andreas realizes that she has most likely already become a victim of the Black Magician. And so far, he doesn't understand how he can help her. Vivian is attacked from behind by another crowd of zombie villagers. Andreas is afraid that she won't be able to dodge. However, she does not live up to his expectations and not only dodges, but also counterattacks, which leaves the guy in shock. Finally, the black magician appears before the green-headed man. He feels sorry that the only survivor escaped, but Andreas doesn't feel sorry because he didn't count on him. The black mage notices that the student is surprisingly calm, and he tells him that he was just thinking that now would be the perfect time for the boss to appear. The magician does not understand where Andreas' confidence comes from, and as a sign of his courage, gives him a chance to pass his test. Andreas also falls into the trap, realizing that he was not careful enough. His body begins to fall apart, and he finds himself in some kind of cosmic environment. He comes to his senses in his body from the real world, in the body of Makoto, who is on the battlefield. He is clearly shell-shocked, and only after waking up does he wonder whether everything that happened before was a dream. He is brought to his senses by an explosion that occurs right next to him. From experience, Makoto immediately grabs a weapon and goes to look for his comrades. In the flames from another explosion, he sees a mangled figure. It's his teammate, asking Makoto to run away. However, he cannot leave his friend to die and runs up to him, trying to do something. However, Shuhei, as that guy was called, was already dead. As if flipping through Makoto's memories mixed with Andreas's, the black mage transforms Shuhei into the body of the game character's dead father. But at first, Makoto doesn't understand who appeared before him, but then Andreas wakes up. He has flashbacks of his father handing Andreas the ring. As long as he holds this ring, he will be the acknowledged lord of the Cromwell family and will no longer have to take on the burden of care from his father. He so wanted his son and daughter to be happy. However, Andreas manages to escape from these unstable memories. With his hand, he breaks through the barrier that the black mage had placed on him, which shocks his opponent. He does not understand how a simple student could free himself from the curse of the deer. However, Andreas is no ordinary student. He is the reincarnated Makoto Kenshiro. Although it would probably be more correct to say that he is a time traveler with specific experience, if we focus on all types of isekai. But in any case, Andreas reached the maximum 100% synchronization rate with Makoto Kenshiro and received his exceptional combat skill. He verbally flirts with the black magician, saying that the curse of laziness is just a dummy that reveals a person's traumas. Besides, it may be because of the weak abilities of the one who used it. This irritates the black magician, and he launches a shadow arrow at Andreas, which the guy easily dodges. The green-haired one says that this won't work on him because he has undergone special training in special forces, which makes the black magician even more angry. He attacks Andreas again, and he dodges again. The guy understands that the attacker is not that strong, but he cannot cope with him without black magic. And he can do this only if no one sees and there are no spectators. The black magician tries to find out who he is actually dealing with, and Andreas intends to show him. He uses summoning magic, however, due to his low level, out of 23 corpses, he can only resurrect 9. From them, he creates skeletons for his army. This surprises the black magician, and he asks if the assembly knows about this. From his words, Andreas understands that the gathering of black magicians really does exist. However, he misunderstood Andreas's intentions. Andreas decides to play on this, saying that on behalf of the council, he was entrusted with restoring Lenny's page. The black magician is amused by the fact that Andreas attacked him with ordinary skeletons, which he easily deals with the strength of Lenny. Andreas protects himself from the arrows approaching him with an earthen shield. Along the way, he summons Nickel. He breaks through Andreas' earthen shield and rushes towards the black mage. He is surprised that a mere skeleton could cut through his spear. This dangerous situation forces the mage to summon the Page of Lenya. With its help, his powers increase significantly. He promises to take Andreas' life for interfering with his plans. For now, Andreas can still dodge his attacks, and Nickel is durable enough to block them. However, the attacks are becoming faster, and Andreas realizes that the attacker has problems controlling his power, which means he has not yet fully mastered the artifact. Now all that remains is to find his blind spot and strike. Andreas gives some instructions to Nickel, and he disappears, leaving him alone. And it seems that the huge hands that the black magician summoned destroyed Nickel. And according to Andreas, he only created it, which only strengthens this impression. The black mage is pleased with this, and plans to send Andreas to accompany his skeleton. But the student is not as simple as he might have thought. Nickel emerges from the vault behind the black mage, and he cuts his carcass in half with his sword. Finally, Andreas will be able to find out who was hiding behind the mask. Who would have thought that it turned out to be the Baron's butler? In that case, it turns out that the Baron is somehow connected with this matter. In any case, Now it's worth taking care of the artifact that dropped from him. This is the Apocalypse Codex, which is the 7th chapter of the Diligent line. It gives the owner a 321% Omana recovery rate. But now Andreas can't carry it with him. Therefore, he gives the artifact to Nickel to keep with him in the vault. Andreas will leave him to be called up in better times. However, despite the fact that the caster died, the barrier somehow still stands. Vivian is still fighting in it. Andreas doesn't really care whether his teammates survive or not. However, if he returns alone, he will have to justify himself. And he can't say that he used black magic, of course. So we need to do something with the barrier that is different from the one he was in. And as soon as Andreas puts his hand against it, the barrier begins to suck him inside. And the guy disappears into it completely. In the barrier, he sees a slightly beaten little Vivian. He is invisible to her and to all the characters in her dream. That is why the girl is afraid of the chair talking to her. She calls the chair a ghost or a demon. But Andreas denies it and says that he is a fairy who came to save her, to which the girl doesn't know how to react. And Andreas himself didn't expect to blurt out something like that. When he first arrived in her dream, he saw the girl being beaten by some high-ranking lady. And thanks to his invisibility, Andreas was able to find out what was going on. This woman is the second wife of Count Belkin. That is Vivian's father. And the place where he is located is her family's estate. The Count himself and his family are famous for their fencing skills. Because of this, the Lord wanted his son to become his heir. However, the girl's mother was unable to give birth to this heir. This is what started the whole tragedy. Her own mother hated the little girl and blamed her for her being born at all, as if it was Vivian's fault. There was no one who could protect the baby. Therefore, loneliness and mistreatment by her family doomed the now grown-up girl to eternal suffering and led her to madness. As time went on, she became more and more insane. And in her 5th year of study, according to the game's plot, Vivian became so crazy that she killed all the teachers and their assistants that she came across. However, now a small, still adequate girl stands before him, a little silly and very scared. And now Andreas, who was ready to leave his teammates to die, for some reason is ready to help the girl overcome her past. His offer to help the girl immediately bursts into tears. Andreas does not understand why she cried, and she replies that no one ever tried to help her. He tells the little girl that she has a special talent that no one has noticed yet, to which she doesn't understand what makes her so special. And Andreas replies that her talent is fencing. The little girl tries to deny it because she has never even picked up a sword. However, Andreas, in the form of a fairy, insists that he knows everything because he is a fairy after all. The girl complains that she is constantly being scolded, but the fairy says that he is on her side, and she must promise that she will not tell anyone about him, in which case he will help her. And the girl accepts this promise. And so their journey begins. He supports her in difficult times when her father's second wife scolds the girl once again. He guides her during training and even watches over her while she sleeps. So a whole month passes inside the barrier. Vivian arrives at the designated meeting place with the fairy. He teaches her fencing and she came to another lesson. Andreas peeks out from behind a tree and scolds the girl for screaming because no one should know about him. They begin their training. Thanks to the talent that Andreas gained during the fight with the Black Magician, an exceptional fight, he tried to train Vivian as best as possible. She in turn grasped all the information on the fly. Andreas truly considers her a real prodigy. After all, the movements that she has acquired now are not the movements of a child who, a month ago, did not even hold a sword in his hands. He says that it is not for nothing that her fencing teacher praises her so much. However, doubts appear on the girl's face. Andreas thought that she had become quite confident, but something was still wrong. It turns out that the girl is sad because, despite all the praise from her fencing teacher, Mr. Fairy will never show himself to her. She thinks that he won't show himself to her because she is a bad child. Vivian hoped that Mr. Fairy would show her his face if she gained power and recognition. But despite all her efforts, he still did not show himself to her. Her monologue with the silent Andreas standing next to her is interrupted by the father of the family. Approaching her, he says that his daughter surprised him. He could not even imagine that she had such a hidden talent. Father asked Vivian to show him fencing again. With a sparkle in her eyes, the girl repeats the lesson she just completed. The Count concludes that, as expected from the blood of his family, her fencing was amazing. As he leaves, Vivian turns to Mr. Fay again, saying that it was the first time her father had ever praised her. It was like a dream. After these words, the barrier begins to collapse. Vivian would like to stay longer with Mr. Fairy, But she comes to her senses, and it is time to wake up from sleep. Thanks to an invisible helper, she was able to find the strength to move forward. Having remembered everything that happened inside the barrier, she promises not to dwell on the past and move forward. Andreas addresses her by her full name and asks the girl to keep her promise with a pinky oath. She, in turn, swears and thanks Mr. Fairy for everything he did and for showing her a good dream. The barrier dissipates and Andreas sits next to the unconscious Vivian. There's a smile on her face, which means everything is okay. By this time, Ivy had gotten out of the barrier on her own, and Andreas told her that Baron Boleric was behind what happened in the village. She ordered Andreas to cut off his head, cut off the butler's head, and not damage the face. Now they will go to the Baron's castle. During their stay in the barrier, Christopher unfortunately passed away, and Khazar also disappeared. The team of the remaining 3 people arrived at the Baron's estate. There, the security guards wouldn't let them in, so Ivy used brute force. She declares that from now on, anyone who tries to protect the Baron will be accused of treason and killed on the spot. Andreas, carrying the dead Christopher, hopes that she doesn't seriously kill everyone here. The girl shows the severed head to the guards. The stitched and bound together head of the former butler appears before them. Ivy introduces him as one of those responsible for what happened in the village. This convinces the guards to let the team inside. The guards lead the trio straight to the Baron. During this campaign, the doors were damaged again. I wonder whose fault it was. In the room, in addition to the head of the estate, they are met by a disfigured creature. The Baron realizes that Evan, that was the butler's name, has died after all. He introduces his son Edel to the team, who was supposed to die from illness several months ago. Based on this, Andreas understands why he took up black magic. The Baron says that while he was looking for medicine, a man came to him and said that he knew a way to help his son, and the Baron in despair accepted this help. He was confident in his decision, even if it meant that his son would end up in such a miserable state. This angers Ivy, but she decides to remain silent for now. The Baron apologizes to his son. Ivy pounces on him, pulling the Baron by the collar, and he asks to say these words to the people he killed along with the butler. The girl orders the guards to call the investigation team and get rid of the monster that the Baron's son has become. Without a second's hesitation, Andreas creates a stone spear. He throws it straight into the disfigured boy's eye. This shocks everyone present, even Ivy. She doesn't understand why he did this without her permission. To which Andreas replies that this creature was created with the help of black magic, and it needs to be gotten rid of faster than it can do anything. A short time later, the Imperial investigation team successfully arrested the Baron and took him away from the castle. They also took away the mutilated body of his once normal son. Upon returning to the academy, Andreas and Vivian were called to testify. After their testimony, the investigator asked to bring the Baron again to interrogate him again. He thanks the students for their assistance and lets them go. Andreas reasons that the consequences of contact with black magic for the Baron will be very serious. However, if Andreas had not killed his son, then the mad scientists of black magic would have conducted horrific experiments on him, for which the Baron should be grateful to Andreas. As if reading his mind, Vivian asked the boy if he killed the Baron's son on purpose, addressing him as Mr. Fairy. In Andreas's eyes after this appeal, Vivian again becomes a little girl who asks if he did it so that the boy would not suffer. Andreas comes to his senses and denies being called a fairy. However, naive Vivian says that Andreas sounds just like Mr. Fairy. This conversation is interrupted by the appearance of Lucia. The hearings are over, and now Andreas has finished his business. On this occasion, Lucia shows him her tablet, which contains photos of his team. Now they have all become celebrities for defeating the Black Magician and completing the investigation. And he became a famous person again, because only recently the potion he and Lucia made was made public. Lucia heard that he and his team received money, and on this occasion asked to treat her to delicious food. But Andreas immediately tries to calm her ardor, because the reward must be divided among everyone. Only now did Lucia notice Vivian standing next to her eldest. Andreas apologizes to Vivian for his slightly stupid friend, and the girls introduce themselves to each other. Returning to the topic of insatiability in terms of food, Lucia says that, whatever the case, Andreas got his share of the money, and they need to have a festive dinner. Andreas says that the potions judges haven't made a decision yet, so the dinner will have to be held some other time. Lucia, reluctantly agreeing to this, invites him to meet tomorrow at the Magic Tower. Andreas asked her not to be late, but in the end, the next day, the guy dragged Lucia to the Magic Tower on his back. At the parish, they are met by a worker from the Magic Tower. He asks their names and leads the children away. He asks the students not to leave him, as the space of the magic tower is constantly changing. On the way, Lucia asks Andreas what his relationship is like with Vivian, to which he replies that it seems like there are none, and catches a close look at himself. The girl once again reminds him that they should go to dinner together, and Andreas asks why she doesn't treat him, when on the contrary, she's rich. During their conversation, a loud voice is heard throughout the tower, saying that it is impudent of them not to be nervous. The owner of the voice is the head of the magic tower. This powerful magician's name is Bart Alban. It was his ancestor who created the magical tower, which is now the site of ongoing research by wizard engineers. The tower is heavily sponsored by the government and nobility. Bart personally came to greet his guests. Looking at Andreas, he notices that he has the same stupid face as his father. As you might guess from his last name, Bart Alban is the father of dark-haired Diana, who was Andreas' childhood friend. He also has an older son. Andreas fears that the Tower Master wants to make his life difficult by appearing, but this is not the case. He then turns to Lucia, who introduces herself. Bart states that in order for the Magic Tower to remember them, they need to look different. That's why he looks like a JoJo reference. Bart decides to use travel magic, which surprises Andreas. Lucia notes that he is, of course, incredibly strong, but what he is doing now looks more like a show. These words are supported by the fact that Bart says that, in addition to this, he can even hear them whispering. After this, the students, along with the head of the tower and the accompanying staff member, move to the Potions Council office. They are surprised to see him, and they have just finished testing the potion for effectiveness. The only thing left for them to do is ask a few questions about the production method. Without a moment's hesitation, Bart takes a sip from the bottle of potion. By its taste, he understands what the potion consists of. But he decides to check with the guys if there is any other ingredient there, and Lucia names the remaining two. Bart is pleasantly surprised that someone was able to create such a potion at such a young age. He asks the council to approve the potion now that his evaluation is complete. However, he is interested in what the son of the House of Cromwell has forgotten here. This scares Andreas a little. The head of the Magic Tower says that the documents certainly indicate that it was a joint effort. However, he suggests that Andreas didn't actually do a damn thing. Seeing that Andreas is silent, Lucia decides to stand up for him. The girl assures that without him, she would not have been able to create this potion, because he did most of the work himself, and the girl only helped. Bart doesn't quite trust her words and decides to check their veracity. With a snap of his finger, Bart casts some kind of spell. Meanwhile, Lucia suggests that he can't use this magic outside the tower, and Andreas is surprised that even now she is analyzing his actions. Bart takes the boys to another part of the tower again and asks Andreas to make a potion right there and use the ingredients from the storage room. The guy agrees and starts working under the watchful eye of the magician engineers who are in the same room with them. Andreas decides to use only the devices he used at the academy so as not to arouse unnecessary suspicion. 5 minutes later, he recreates the potion Bart asked him to make. The master of the Magic Tower admits that Andreas did everything right, but he still has questions. And he starts asking them. He added a new ingredient to get rid of the side effects and enhance the potion's effects. And even though he hasn't finished explaining yet, Bart interrupts him, telling him that he doesn't have to continue any further. Although the Tower Master has not seen Andreas for a long time, he believes that the boy he knew could never have come up with such a potion. Bart doesn't believe that Andreas is who he says he is. After a short silence, Andreas smiles and asks Sir Alvin not to joke like that, because he is still the same Andreas Cromwell. The same guy that Bart constantly made fun of and treated like a bug. Bart notices that the green-haired guy has become an interesting guy. He challenges him to a bet. If Andreas makes another potion this year that passes the test, then Bart will pay off all of the Cromwell family's debts. And besides, it will fulfill one of his wishes. But if Andreas fails, he will be forced to leave the academy immediately. Without thinking twice, even though the conditions are not the best, Andreas accepts his offer since he is the heir of the Cromwell family and has no right to refuse it. Bart also hopes that Andreas will succeed and will not change his confidence. He sees in the Cromwell's eldest son a reflection of his father, who was once Bart's friend. Now he is eagerly awaiting the results from Andreas. Meanwhile, the vampire's evolution is coming to an end. She finally comes to her senses and feels incredible strength, with the help of which the girl easily breaks her shackles and makes her way to freedom. Angela remembers that she swore on her family's behalf not to kill Andreas, but now she doesn't need to. Thanks to the performance in the Magic Tower, Andreas was compensated for part of the cost of materials, and his need for money was significantly reduced. Now, if he concentrates on making potions, he will be able to devote most of his time to training. The only question that worries him now is the page of laziness that lies in his bins. Andreas doesn't know how to use it and comes to the conclusion that perhaps it should be exchanged for the things he needs. And for this, he will have to use his teacher, Karen. The guy returns back to the academy, and in front of the gate, he feels that someone is looking at him. Someone is watching him from the side. At first, he dismisses the thought, but there is a vampire lurking in the tree. But for now, she doesn't do anything. Andreas initiates Karen, and he is surprised by the hot topic of discussion at the academy, caused by Andreas. The guy came to report to the teacher right after the end of the exam. Karen condemns him for the fact that Andreas researched the potion in secret from him and is now trying to pretend to be a good student. Andreas was about to start making excuses, but Karen shuts him up and suggests that he simply follow him silently. Andreas notes in his mind how petty it is of him to be offended by something like that. However, now, due to Karen's mood, he will not be able to raise the topic of exchanging the page of laziness for something meaningful. But at least he would be able to check the vampire's condition. He would like to, at the very least. He doesn't know yet. Judging by Karen's reaction, it seems he didn't know either. After all, when they enter his basement, the two can only observe the scale of the destruction and the moat that stretches from the place where Angela is imprisoned. Andreas concludes that evolution has been successful. She was an extremely good specimen, and it's a shame that Andreas won't be able to see her again. His thoughts are interrupted by Karen, who is enraged. He asks Andreas if he did something to Angela's restraints, to which Andreas replies that he still wants to live, and naturally, he didn't do it. Andreas comments to himself that Karen is too stupid, and that serves him right. And the elder Necromancer at this time becomes even more furious. At night, leaving his house, Andreas thinks about what he will bring Lenny's page next time. And at this moment, the vampire decides to say hello to him. All this time, she was waiting for him in ambush. She had wanted to ask him some question ever since she woke up. Angela asks Andreas about the power she received. The guy asks her about the reason for the vampire's actions, because he kept his word. And she must also not break the oath of her family. The girl does not intend to kill him, she just cannot resist asking him about this power. The vampire could have easily freed herself from her shackles with her newfound strength, but she chose a different path. She was about to tell Andreas exactly what it was, but she sensed the scent of great sin on him. The girl pushes him against the wall, saying that she still wants to discuss a lot with him. But now is not the right time, so it is worth stopping at what is. The vampire promises to use her new power for good. She also promises not to hurt Andreas, and on the contrary wants to somehow repay him in the future. After all, perhaps fate itself brought them together. Meanwhile, we are transported to the elite dormitory of the Rodlin Academy. On an elegant balcony, Diana sits with the same blonde she talked to inside the train, drinking tea and eating some goodies. A dark-haired girl enthusiastically shows her interlocutor illustrations from some book and retells its plot to her. The blonde asks her to finish her sermon already, but Diana is sure that Julia, as her interlocutor is called, will only be able to find a knight to root for after carefully studying everything. The girl changes the subject, reminding about the recent news that Lucia's potion passed the evaluation of the magic tower. Diana is surprised that at her age she was able to do this, especially since Lucia is very lazy. However, the girl's age is not the most surprising thing about this news, because Andreas worked with her to create the potion. This surprises Diana even more, because he, it would seem, is untalented, but still managed to stand out. Diana recalls that after the fall of his family, Andreas could only rely on his position in society and his talent. However, he thought that he could not achieve anything on his own. But since those words were spoken, the guy really changed. Although her friend Diana believed in what was happening, the dark-haired girl herself decided to see for herself the success of her former friend. Another potion-making class begins, and Andreas shows up again, but for some reason wrapped in a huge amount of clothing. When Lucia asks about this, he denies that he feels unwell. Lucia doesn't understand why he came then, and he makes excuses that he needs attendance for graduation. But the real reason for his dark and tangled clothes is that last night the vampire lost her temper and bit the guy on the neck. Angela's words about the smell coming from Andreas and the fact that fate itself brought them together, the guy did not understand. She bit him and immediately disappeared. Meanwhile, the lecture begins. The professor's already in the classroom, and he is about to begin the class. But suddenly he notices Andreas puffing somewhere in the back rows. The professor remembers the news he saw about the release of the potion and decides to talk about it. But first he asks if his student is sick. Andreas replies that he has a cold, and the professor decides to send him on vacation, especially since he has already marked him. However, before Andreas leaves, the professor asks why Andreas did not include his name on the list of creators of the potion. After all, he turned to him, a professor of herbalism, for his advice. Andreas is shocked by such impudence because the professor did absolutely nothing. But he decides to deal with him in a noble way, saying that he is very grateful for the advice. He is especially grateful for advice on 2 ingredients he had asked about earlier. Lucia is surprised that Andreas decided to be cheeky to the professor in this way. The guy reminds that the teacher told him that with this composition, Andreas would get soup. And, as you can see, the soup turned out quite good. The entire audience freezes at such statements. The professor notices that Andreas is going too far, and the guy leaves, reminding him that he doesn't feel well. The professor can only shout after him, but Andreas doesn't care at all. After all, when he was trampled in the mud, he only laughed at him, but now he wanted to be friends. So now let him envy in silence. The professor's restless and again turns to Andreas with a demand not to ignore him. But Lucia distracts him. The girl is going to explain herself on behalf of Andreas, since she also created this potion. The professor allows her to do so. The girl says that they learned the basics of potion making in his lessons. But later they applied them in practice and came to the conclusion that it was very important to conduct research without anyone's help. And this is their duty as wizards. The professor has to agree with this and shut up. Andreas is surprised that Lucia was able to convince him. To ease the tension in the room, Lucia tells the professor that she will definitely seek his advice next time, if he is not too busy with his own research. Vauban didn't notice this taunt, which is why the expression on his face immediately changes. He becomes kinder and wishes Andreas a speedy recovery. The guy is amazed by Lucia's ability to get out of difficult situations. In his mind, he thanks the girl, even though he doesn't yet know why. Somewhere in the capital, a court official reports to Officer Anyugo about the promising talents who have just been enrolled in a popular academy. He was pleasantly surprised that the daughter of the Everlast company released her own potion in her first year of study and sent it into production. The potion was named after her and has already been released for sale. The man asks his worker if he has a sample, and she replies yes. The man receives a small bottle and wonders if this amount is enough. Thanks to the girl's success, many will be interested in her, and the red-haired Duke had better contact her as soon as possible. He tastes the potion and crushes the empty vial in his huge hand. The secretary immediately asks about its effect. The man is amazed by its amazing effect. In addition to the fact that this potion is several times more effective than its analogs, it does not even have any side effects. It can turn the whole market upside down if it is well distributed. The girl also reports that the article indicates that the potion has several creators. She shows the man a photograph of Andreas. He is surprised to see him there, and the girl suggests that the guy could have used Lucia's name in order to get into the creator. However, they dismiss this version, since the Everlast and Cromwell families are not friends, and they will have to believe in Andreas' talent for potions. Since he has awakened his talent, he needs to be added to the list of candidates they are going to consider. However, this red-haired Aura Master is not the only one who has his eye on Andreas. Someone wants to completely exterminate the Cromwell family and has already set their sights on the boy. This man clearly knew his father and wants to know how different Andreas is from his older ancestor. And the guy continues to train in fencing with Nickel, tirelessly. Thanks to the potion he created, he can achieve a sword swing repetition rate of up to 10,000 times. However, he doesn't just use one potion, he also uses an additional one. He was able to create the second potion in the shortest possible time thanks to that same evolution skill when he developed his talent in creating potions. Now his talent in creating potions of the enhancing type has increased to the rank of uncommon. The guy was able to create a low-grade invigorating potion and train almost endlessly. If Andreas' progress continues in the same vein, he will be able to become much stronger in a very short time. In addition, if he can get a good corpse and some of the materials he needs, his combat strength will also increase. But unfortunately, Karen is constantly absent, and there is no way to sell Lenny's page yet. But at this stage, there is no point in worrying about this, because there are no communication channels with Karen anyway. Now it's time to go and rest before tomorrow's herbalism lesson. Arriving at the lesson, Andreas again comes across a table indicating that someone is absent somewhere. For some reason, the herbalism professor moved the class outside and informed the students about it via tablets, but Andreas doesn't have a tablet. The boy thought that the professor used this against him because he knew about his family's poverty. Having finally gotten to class, Andreas notices that all the students are in a hurry for some reason. He concludes that Vauban has decided to hold an exam. The professor meets him and reproaches him for being late. He teases Andreas that perhaps the student was so busy with his own research that he didn't even notice the message. Lucia immediately grabs Andreas by the shoulder and promises to explain everything to him. She insists that Andreas buys himself a tablet, since he now has money. The girl shows the guy an article that says that the professor has discovered the awakening potion, and now he has decided to conduct an exam on its analysis. Andreas understands that the professor just wants to show off. Sensing this, Vauban suggests that Andreas, with his strong level in potion making, will easily be able to figure out the proportions and composition of the potion. After this, the professor mixes up his lines in his head and says out loud that he will show everyone what a worthless person Andreas is, instead of saying that a bright future awaits him. Vauban believes that Andreas simply took advantage of Lucia's kindness and that he is a common scumbag. Andreas decides not to respond to his barbs in any way and simply continues to work on analyzing the potion. 4 hours later, the professor is amazed by the results of the exam. According to the results of the test, 3 winners have passed. In first place is Lucia with the shortest time, 100% result. In second place is Andreas with 100% result, but a little longer. And in third place is an unknown student. The examiner confirms that there were no violations during the exam, which surprises the professor as well as the other students. But no one has time to pounce on Andreas, because a student breaks out of the crowd and accuses the professor. It turns out that the herbalist took the potion that his student had made himself. The guy put a lot of effort into creating the potion, and the professor just brazenly stole it. The students were confused. They didn't think the professor could do such a thing. Andreas discusses the situation with Lucia, and she is sure that their teacher could have done it. Having received confirmation of his suspicions, Andreas heads to the professor. He wants to ask him a question about the ingredients of the potion, to which the herbalist replies that now is not the time. However, this answer to the question can prove that the professor is the creator of the potion. Such statements clearly make Walben nervous. However, the student agrees to Andreas's proposal in order to prove his case. The professor is, after all, a teacher at a prestigious academy, so he believes he can answer all questions. Andreas asks why he replaced some resin with petals from another plant, and the professor was so focused on the day of the potion demonstration that he completely forgot to check this particular part. The student who accuses him reproaches him for remaining silent for too long, so the professor is forced to respond. The guy says that using the petals reduces the cost of the potion, so they continue the interrogation. The next question is not so much about cost, since the potion used a more expensive beetle instead of a cheap powder. The students fall silent, waiting for an answer. The professor remains silent, his lips pressed together. He hears his students start to criticize their own teacher and decides to respond with something. Finally collecting his thoughts, the professor replies that the powder has a hallucinogenic effect, so it was worth replacing it with even more expensive beetles. But the real creator of the potion did not replace the powder for this purpose. After all, when the potion is heated, the powder also becomes very hot and can cause stomach pain. The professor tries to defend his point of view, and his student remembers that Vauban actually spoke about the side effects of this powder. However, he never mentioned hallucinations. Now he wonders how the professor knows about it. The students all take the side of the student whose potion was stolen. They accuse Vauban of not having a degree at all and of being a thief and a fraud. The professor, distraught with shame, begins to shout at the crowd and tries to force Andreas and the second student to admit that they lied. Otherwise, the professor will report them to the disciplinary committee. Andreas stands up for them and suggests that they contact Bart Alphen directly to sort things out completely. After all, he has such an opportunity because Sir Alvin is sponsoring him. Even Lucia is surprised that Andreas threatens the professor with a card. The man finally shuts up and Andreas continues to press him, saying that he wants to achieve justice. Vauban finally gives in, and Bart, in the form of an eagle, was watching their squabble the whole time. He is pleasantly surprised by the way Andreas used his name. It was bold. Moreover, he easily figured out the theory and composition of the awakening potion, which means that the guy will actually be able to create a new potion before the end of the year. And Bart will be looking forward to it. After the lesson, Andreas decided to treat Lucia to food. However, she is unhappy that, of all places, he chose the academy cafeteria. After asking if she was going to eat, the girl immediately grabbed the hot meat and burned herself. Andreas reproaches her and asks her to eat like a rich lady. The guy shows how to properly take the meat by the bone and dip it in the sauce. Lucia argues with him. Even though she is rich, she can eat however she wants. However, the girl still takes the meat from Andreas's hands, which is properly prepared for consumption. Vivian, who is sitting at the same table with them, turns to Andreas. She also wants to take the meat from his hands. He is a little surprised by this, but with a warm smile, he hands her the same thing he gave Lucia. And you can't tell me that her behavior after being in the barrier hasn't become extremely cute. As Lucia leaves the cafeteria, she continues to pester Andreas about his need for a tablet. The guy justifies himself by saying that he is currently saving money, but Lucia is perplexed because the tablet is not expensive at all. Vivian is not involved in this whole conversation because she is still thinking about how Mr. Fairy gave her meat. She offers to give something to Mr. Fairy too. However, Andreas refuses and tries to pretend that he doesn't understand, for some reason calling him Mr. Fairy. Reaching the turn he needs, Andreas says goodbye to his fellow travelers. Lucia is unhappy that he is leaving, but she lets him go anyway, and the guy says goodbye to them. On the way in the corridor, he meets his teacher. Sharon is finally back, and for some reason he looks at Andreas with great disdain. The guy tries to greet him normally, but Karen just walks past, throwing Andreas an invitation to come to his laboratory tomorrow. The green-haired man naturally agrees. He realizes that it is high time to use his trump card on Karen. Andreas had already made thorough preparations for this meeting in a forge called the Skillful Hammer. He understands that Karen considers him and his property to be his property, so he may try to take Lenny's page by force. So Andreas decided to finally get a sword after so much time of fencing training. In the forge, he meets Diana. She is surprised to meet her former comrade here. The guy says that he needs a sword, to which Diana remarks that he is still a magician and he doesn't need it. However, Andreas wants to take care of his own self-defense. Diana also leaves the forge with a newly acquired sword for her brother. Andreas remembers Carlos Alfin, who has not yet featured in the current story. This guy is Diana's older brother, as we already know, and he is training in the way of warriors. As children, just like with Diana, they got along well. By the time the game Makoto played began, Carlos was already dead, so there was little information about him. However, if his memory serves him right, he died as a result of an event at the academy that was held at the end of the year. After the mission during which Khazar disappeared, he joined a religious cult that carried out a terrorist attack at the event. Andreas asks Diana if Carlos will be attending the event at the end of the year, to which he receives a positive answer. He replies that it would be great if the three of them met again. Diana is pleasantly surprised by this, although embarrassed. She had already managed to ask other people about Andreas, and he had really changed for the better. However, now the girl wants to ask him about something directly, and Andreas notices this. But Diana does not have time to say anything because of excitement. So Andreas quickly takes his leave and leaves the forge. Diana finally gathers the strength to ask him something. But Andreas had already disappeared behind the door. Remembering Carlos, he realizes that there is still time before the cult attacks. We flash back to Karen, who is now in the academy's teaching department with Andreas, where his teacher talks about his journey across the continent and how he couldn't find anyone suitable for the role of the runaway Angela. Now he hopes that at this weekend's meeting, he will have a chance to get something worthwhile. Andreas understands that this is where the game will begin, and if he offers Karen to bargain with the help of Lenya's page, then the situation will be in his hands. Finally, Andreas finds the right moment to tell Karan about his acquisition. Karan naturally does not believe him, because a weakling like Andreas could not have obtained such an important item. However, the guy doesn't mince words. Although no, it does fit, but into a pocket dimension, from where he immediately takes out Lenny's page. Karen is amazed by what he sees. Andreas doesn't think he can wield such a powerful item and wants to give it to his teacher. Through clenched teeth, Karen offers the guy to keep it for himself. Right on schedule with Andreas, Karen asks him to keep Lenny's page in storage until the meeting, where they can exchange it for something worthwhile. The teacher would have taken the artifact for himself if it hadn't threatened his life. Andreas was counting on that. Karan asks Andreas to clear his schedule this weekend, as they will have a lot to do. The plot doesn't make us wait long, and here in a chariot, the coachman of which is an undead, these two are already heading to the eastern outskirts of the city. Andreas understands that even though he finally got to the meeting, it is a very dangerous situation because there will be many people there with whom he will not be able to come to an agreement. Karan, meanwhile, talks out loud about how he can exchange Lenya's page for more expensive things that will make him stronger. Andreas is pleased that his teacher considers the artifact his own acquisition. Suddenly, someone stops the chariot. A certain blonde guy takes off his canopy and asks the guys if they mind him becoming their travel companion. Andreas is as surprised as Karen, because now Salem Adidia is riding in the same carriage with them. He is called the devil who pursues the truth, because he is ready to do anything for his experiments. He is also one of the great 10 continents. He and Karan should carefully hide information about Lenya's page from this person. Salem notices Charon's displeased expression and becomes displeased as well. The Necromancer begins to justify himself like a little child, to which Salem is irritated by laughter, saying that he has already been to the meeting several times. The blonde asks Andreas what his name is. Hearing his name, Salem is surprised that Karen disgraced himself against another Cromwell. Andreas doesn't understand what they're talking about, and Salem understands that Andreas doesn't know anything. Andreas looks askance at Karen, and with his facial expression, he lets the guy know that it's better for him to keep quiet. As the carriage moves forward, the passengers are pursued. Seeing through the eyes of the skeleton driver, Karen notices unwanted guests. He stops the carriage and asks Dragan, who appears from the black goo, to come out and talk to them personally. He rises and a dark viscous liquid creates his silhouette. The man finally appears in human form and apologizes for disturbing him. However, very soon the smile disappears from his face and is replaced by concern. He didn't notice that Salem was with the other passengers in the carriage. The blonde with a smile on his face asks the man to shut up because his mouth stinks. Andreas remembers the deep-sea dragon, who was aptly named. This man came to steal Lenny's page but didn't expect to meet Salem. Charon notices that the leader of the meeting, Sir Morsh, has noticed them and points the way to the meeting. Salem is unhappy that they chose such a high place. The man notes that there will be a massacre here, since a bunch of fools have appeared. Someone too arrogant sent them to steal the codex in Salem's presence. However, they underestimate his power, and with one wave of his staff, Salem learns how many attackers have gathered in the area. He releases his magical energy in a huge radius, and thanks to it, he can see the core inside every person. Naturally, Andreas's double core is also illuminated, but will Salem notice it? He finds 7 attackers and decides to end their game of hide-and-seek as quickly as possible. Salem instantly teleports to them. Therefore, the attackers immediately try to retreat, but the blonde turns out to be faster. He releases his magical energy again, but this time in a different way, causing a huge explosion. Meanwhile, the council members, along with the meeting, calmly await the arrival of the last guest. All those present greet each other, and the head of the meeting is surprised to see Salem come to it. It is not surprising that all this time the blonde knew about Lenny's page, which is located at Andreas. He asks the guy to open the bag, and out of it fall the heads of those Salem dealt with a few minutes earlier. The rest of the meeting participants are not particularly surprised by the contents of the bag. Sir Morsh, the leader of the assembly, accuses Salem of choosing to commit an unnecessary murder even during an urgent meeting of the assembly. Andreas understands that it would be difficult to deal with intermediate class mages and above, but Salem simply released magical energy and they died. This is definitely a man to be reckoned with. Morsh asks to show Lenny's page as soon as possible. Andreas silently asks his teacher for permission and begins the ritual, during which Salem remarks that he is an interesting guy. Moreover, he did not flinch in the face of so many magicians and was completely indifferent to the request to cut off their heads. And of course, Salem noticed that Andreas had a double core, just like his own. For some unknown reason, Salem's playfulness causes him to lightly blow on Andreas's neck. To the guy's surprise, Salem replies that he liked him, which makes Andreas wonder if Salem was gay in the game. The purple-haired sorceress scolds Salem for what he allows himself to do, and he continues the conversation with Andreas and promises to do him one favor. Andreas recalls that in the game, Salem never broke his promises, no matter how crazy they were. Therefore, since he has such carte blanche, he can make some changes to his plans. Andreas summons Nickel from the vault along with Lenny's page. The meeting participants are amazed that the artifact is genuine. Karen is perplexed as to when his student managed to summon this skeleton, and Salem is surprised that the guy entrusted such an important artifact to the undead. Andreas knows he has no chance against the monsters at the meeting, so he can't hesitate. He asks Nickel to step back and calls him back to the vault, which surprises the meeting participants. Andreas' next move shocks even Salem, not to mention everyone else gathered. But you should remember this green-eyed blonde who enjoys the hustle and bustle. Andreas plunges his newly purchased sword into his chest. Morsch asks what he does. Andreas claims that he was the one who found Lenny's page and wants his efforts to be appreciated. This enrages the assembled monsters. The head of the congregation accuses Andreas of being mad with greed. However, Andreas has a plan. Lenny's page is in his vault with the skeleton, so if the guy dies, they won't get the codex. He approaches Salem with a request and asks him to hurry since Andreas has little time. Salem is pleasantly surprised by Andreas's recklessness. And the guy says that if Salem had deceived him, he would have done everything possible, even if it meant he would die, because he must at least try to survive in this crazy world, and in that case, he must be crazy himself. Salem once again confirms that Andreas is a funny guy, and despite the fact that he told him to fight, the blonde didn't think he would go that far. Salem releases his sword, which turns out to be a sinister spear with a menacing serpent. Since Andreas insists so much, Salem has no choice but to kill everyone present. Salem promises to kill anyone who dares to touch Andreas. They understand each other so well without saying a word, as if they were made for each other. Not in a gay way, of course. The blonde also adds that he will kill anyone who dares to touch the greenhead after this meeting. The leader is surprised that one of the Great 10 is ready to fight with them over some child. However, Salem reminds him that he would never lie. The purple-haired girl had already accused Salem of bullying her, but his face turned serious, and he had no intention of repeating what he had already said. This seriousness made everyone present fall silent. Morche, realizing that nothing can be done about this situation, asks Andreas what he wants. Realizing that the situation has turned out the way he wanted, the guy finally pulls out the sword and drinks a potion that heals his wounds. He wants to know what the meeting participants are willing to offer for Lenya's page, to which Morshi replies that it is absurd not to know what he wants. However, it allows him to choose 5 items from the list provided. It contains powerful corpses that might be of interest to a novice necromancer. On the list, he sees the corpses already familiar to us in the form of the Tiger King Timur and the former Fairy Queen Milena. Perhaps making a Chapter 0 in this manga was an oversight on the part of the author, as we were given too many spoilers. One of the meeting participants is unhappy that these corpses are being offered as a choice for Andreas, as they have already been sold to one of the most powerful necromancers. Andreas had already thought about giving them up, but Morn himself, the same necromancer who had been eavesdropping on the entire conversation, having taken possession of the body of a dead fly, allows Andreas to take them just like that. To which Karen objects, because Andreas does not yet have the skills to use such powerful corpses. The necromancer in the body of a fly shuts his mouth and offers the guy to take the corpses from his spatial bag. Andreas doesn't understand why Morn is so generous with him, but he can't pass up such an opportunity. He thanks him for his generosity and continues to pick up the remaining items, including these corpses. Karen begins to think that it would be worthwhile to bring this page to Looney himself. Andreas chose 2 powerful potions, 2 rare ingredients to create a new potion, and a certain magic ball, in addition to the corpses that he got for free. Selim notes that there are better items among the items offered, but Andreas has his sights set on these. From these ingredients, Andreas can make 4 potions that are worth more than several hundred million, as well as the necessary ingredients to cure Lucia's illnesses. And the last part of the deal is to finally hand over Lenny's page to the assembly. Andreas opens the vault and takes out an artifact from there, which he gives to the leader. And Salem asks Andreas to prepare for escape. Andreas clearly didn't expect this outcome. He asks Salem if the congregation would kill him if he gave them the page, to which the blonde replies in the affirmative. However, he still made him a promise, so now he will deliver him to a safe place. Andreas asks to be left at the nearest station to Rodlin Academy. On the way, Salem asks Andreas if Bart knows that he is a black magician. Andreas replies that of course not. Otherwise, he would no longer be alive. Salem calls Fate a villain. Andreas doesn't understand what he's talking about. To which the blonde replies that everything has its time. Already in the academy dormitory, Andreas, together with Nickel, unpacks his newly acquired goods. He thanks the spatial bag for being able to accommodate the corpse of the giant Tiger King. He reasons that even though Nickel was summoned as a skeleton, the 2 corpses he acquired today are best left for better times. So Andreas sends them to his storage. That same necromancer Morn, in addition to 2 high-class corpses, also gave Andreas a book. He wrote it himself, and it will teach Andreas high-level black magic. He would never have received such knowledge in Karen's library. Andreas's thoughts are interrupted by a system window that appears. It offers a 100% chance of evolving Nickel. This window appeared after Andreas gave the page to Lenny, and he concludes that the codex somehow influenced evolution. Without hesitation, he decides to use it, and notices that Nickel does not feel pain, as he did with the vampire, perhaps because he is undead. Andreas's thoughts are interrupted by now, so someone decides to break into his dorm room. Headlong, the mud-headed man flies to the door, sending Nickel into the storage facility along the way. It was Lucia, and judging by her face, she came with good news. But before we are given this good news, let us move back to Sir Salem. He communicates with the same necromancer who was so generous with Andreas. It was this man who told Salem about Lenny's page. Salem thinks that the reason for this is that for some reason, the necromancer needs Andreas alive. He ignores his question, continuing to sip his tea. So the blonde gives his other guess. Perhaps the necromancer needed Lenya's page, but he remained silent. Or perhaps Andreas was forced upon him by the Empire, but he did not undertake his training due to lack of talent. The old man finally calms Salem down. He starts from afar with the origins of necromancers. Necromancy pursues immortality. Although, to be more precise, then she pursues immortality for those you love. This type of magic was created from the desire to be with your loved one forever. Salem doesn't understand why Morn decided to tell him a story, but the old man replies that he leaves the reasons why Andreas is still alive to Salem's imagination, because of which he guesses that there is something more connected to him and the boy than just his father. Salem gives up on his guess, and now it's the necromancer's turn to ask him what he thinks of the guy. But he should know everything anyway, since he was spying on them from the very beginning. But either way, Salem's opinion ends with Andreas becoming the craziest man in the world, perhaps even crazier than himself, and he's looking forward to it. Finally, we get back to Lucia's good news. She brought Andreas into her home and introduced him to her father, William. He wanted to talk to Andreas personally about the potion profit agreement. Besides, he wanted to meet him because Andreas had become a close friend of his daughter. William hands over the contract to Andreas. It states that Andreas will receive 60% of the profits, even though each potion costs 3 million. More than 1,000 units were sold in a month, so Andreas' current profit exceeds 1.8 billion. William claims that the next amount will be much larger because the potion is being sold out very quickly. But this is where the talk of business ends, and the head of the family invites everyone to dinner. After a month, the potion became very popular among militants and aristocracy. They already sold 2,000 pieces in a month. Andreas even wonders if he should have bought the tablet earlier, but he didn't know about this outcome. Due to the popularity of the potion, he received a lot of support from the aristocracy, and now he has 6 million in his account. Taking into account all duties, his former family's estate is worth 3.5 billion. He can buy it right now and still have a lot of money left over. However, first he heads to the cemetery to return his family ring. He comes to the meeting place with the man who dug up the nickel corpse for him in exchange for the ring. However, there is another man in a mask with him. Nevertheless, the man invites Andreas to come inside. He introduces the masked man as a guarantor in order to avoid possible problems. Andreas immediately recognizes this lie, because the guarantor would not be wearing a mask and would not be holding it in his hands today. Payman practiced necromancy for some time. He is no stronger than Karen. In addition, the improved nickel can already use aura. Therefore, no one that Payman can summon will be able to defeat him. Payman, in turn, offers Andreas tea, which he ordered from one of the people in the congregation. Andreas wants to talk exclusively about the ring. Despite the fact that, according to Andreas's sly words, the corpse he bought was quite ordinary, he is ready to pay Payman 5 million for his service. Payman naturally is surprised by such a huge cost, but he sees how rich Andreas has become and naturally tries to squeeze more out of him with the help of his rotten nature. However, he is not interested in money. He wants to exchange the ring for one of the things that Andreas received at the meeting. He had already heard that he had grabbed a lot and was only asking him to share. Payman hopes that Andreas will accept this offer, but the guy refuses and says that his price is final. This makes the cemetery caretaker furious, but the green-haired man remains calm and understands that Payman does not agree to a fair deal. A masked man intervenes in the conversation, telling his employer that the conversation is over. Andreas is also tired of this circus, so he calls on Nickel. However, he still had one question. Could the two of them defeat him? Payman promises his mercenary to increase the pay if only he would chop Andreas into pieces and take his things. Nickel immediately pounces on Payman from behind. The masked swordsman rushes to his defense, and Andreas silently watches what is happening. The attacking swordsman threw his robe towards Andreas. On the backside, there are sticky bombs. However, Andreas quickly deals with them, but at the same time notices the excellent skills of his opponent. The fight continues, and the unknown swordsman parries towards Nickel, even cutting him. However, the skeleton grabs him by the leg and throws the unknown man into the air. And while he is levitating, he charges his sword with aura. Even Andreas is surprised by such a reception from his ward. Although Nickel had evolved and acquired Dantan, he wouldn't have used this move unless the enemy was very strong. Andreas still doesn't understand who he is. The masked man moves at great speed and continues the battle with Nickel. He receives several minor wounds from the skeleton and even manages to pierce its skull. However, Nickel takes on a ghostly form and the blow goes nowhere. After which he counterattacks his opponent and he flies out the window. Payman traps his ally with the help of his corpses from the storage. He addresses the mercenary as Dan. Payman notices that Nickel is a phantom. This is how he became after evolution, and because of this, he was able to use the ghost form. However, Payman thinks that Andreas received it at the meeting, and that Andreas will not be enough against the best warriors in his vault. Besides, they are in the graveyard, and he can resurrect enough warriors. In his mind, Andreas orders Nickel to split up and return to Payman as soon as the right moment is found. Andreas jumps out of the building and deals with a number of corpses aimed at him with his sword. He defends himself with an earthen shield against those who attack him from behind, and tries to maintain enough strength to defend against counterattacks. With the help of a stone spear, he clears a path for himself a little, but not for long. Payman also has skeleton archers on his side, which are more difficult to fight against. However, with the help of Andreas' mastery of the sword, he holds his own, which does not please Payman, and he sends more corpses at him. At this time, Nickel appears out of nowhere and again attacks the gravedigger, who is protected from behind by Dan. He's no slouch either, and has already attached a sticky bomb to Nickel's chest, which explodes and throws the skeleton back. And there are too many enemies approaching Andreas, and he doesn't have time to drink the recovery potion. At this rate, his strength will soon be exhausted. His body's already going numb, and Nickel still hasn't come to help. Andreas isn't sure he can hold out until Nickel returns. And then a skeleton with a huge axe attacks him from behind, which he is afraid he won't be able to dodge. So he blocks its attack with his sword. Andreas kicks him, but falls onto his back. Barely getting up, he immediately receives a blow to the forehead. The skeleton knocks him to the ground and continues to punch him. Andreas is in a state of rising and already thinks that he will die here around some skeleton of a night. Thinking about his death, he remembers his sister. He remembers Lucia and Vivian, whom he never managed to help completely. Finally, he has a reason to live, and he can't just die. Gritting his teeth, Andreas decides to grab hold of life. And the system informs him that through long training and talent, in brutal battles, he has finally awakened the aura. His Dantian was activated and he could finally use it. Having reached his sword, the guy cuts off the head of the skeleton that was sitting on him with one movement, along the way activating the achievement of the second awakening. Having dealt with the enemy, Andreas finally rises from the ground. He walks completely battered and weak through the handfuls of bones that remain from his enemies. Paimon at sword point. Andreas asks his former comrade where his ring is. However, Paimon asks him to put away the sword first. Besides, one of the opponents is already dead, and it will be much easier for them to make a deal. While Andreas was lying somewhere in the grass, Nickel had already dealt with the masked man. That's good. Andreas takes the sword of the already dead Den in his other hand. He asks the cemetery lord his question again, but Paimon still tries to stop him, for which Andreas immediately cuts off his hand. Not wanting to waste any more time on him, Andreas insists that Paimon tell him where his ring is. Paimon replies that it is in the bottom drawer of the closet. He is already ready to head there, but something in Red's behavior makes him nervous. The armless man begins to cough up blood, and veins appear on his face. Coughing even harder, he falls to the ground dead. Andreas had planned to get rid of him anyway, but something killed Paimon faster. Dan's sword was poisoned. Andreas speculates that a skilled swordsman with a poisoned sword was hired by Paimon. Who was he? And then he remembers that the cemetery lord named him Dan, and he remembers the name from the game. It featured the nickname Bloody Den. If true, the mask changes the appearance of its owner. And so it turned out. By removing the mask from Dan's head and putting it on himself, Andreas transformed into the same appearance that his killer had previously had. The guy decides to keep the mask because it would suit Nickel very well. And this very bloody den in the game was the man who started the war. He was hired to kidnap the daughter of the northern barbarian leader, which caused a war between the North and the Empire. In the future, the war would have spread across the continent, and according to the plot, Andreas himself would have been in it, but he accidentally prevented it. Future events. Andreas sends Nickel to find the ring while he cleans up the cemetery, although it would seem that's the place for corpses. Even though Andreas learned how to create a potion to strengthen the body, he still hasn't invented a healing potion, so for now he has to undergo treatment at the clinic. On his tablet, he reads the news about what happened at the cemetery. The journalists turned everything around so that Dan and Payman fought over money and killed each other. In that case, this situation will not affect Andreas in any way. To Payman anyway, the guy buys his family estate. Suddenly, someone sneaks up behind him and covers his eyes with his hands. Naturally, it can't be anyone but Lucia. She asks him to guess who it is, but Andreas only answers her with a long silence. Lucia notices what a bore he is, and the boys finally say hello. The girl came to visit Andreas in the hospital and brought him a basket of fruit. He thanks her for her visit, and the girl reinforces his words because he should have said them as soon as she arrived. Lucia finally asks what happened to him, and Andreas replies that he overdid it during training, not to mention his sparring partners. The girl says that at this rate he will die one day, and then Vivian bursts into the room. She is very upset to see Andreas in such a state. The girl immediately rushes into his arms, saying that she was very worried. It's not clear from Andreas's face whether he liked this attention or not, but nevertheless he tells Vivian that it's okay. But Lucia apparently is not particularly happy. Perhaps someone is vying for her place as the best girl in this manhwa. This war will be worse than the war between the North and the Empire. A week later, Andreas is discharged from the hospital and takes Ami by carriage to an unknown destination. We know in what direction, but the girl has no idea yet. She went with her brother only because he returned his ring. She is surprised that her brother allowed them such an expensive carriage, and for some reason the curtains in it are completely closed. The coachman informs the passengers that they have arrived, and Ami asks again if Andreas would like to show her where they have arrived. He replies that she will find out very soon. His words are confirmed by someone's familiar voice, to which Ami reacts. An elderly woman dressed as a maid opens the doors of the carriage. Ami recognizes her. The woman's name is Lupin. She was a servant in the Cromwell household before the family went bankrupt. Ami replies that Andreas cannot afford it now. The girl immediately begins to apologize to the elderly woman. But as soon as she opens her eyes, Ami sees where her older brother has brought her. Lupin helps the girl out of the carriage because she would hardly be able to stand on her own due to surprise. In front of her is a view of their childhood home, the Applewood Estate, as the Cromwell's home was otherwise known. Here they spent their entire childhood together with their father. However, the girl is in no hurry to rejoice because she does not understand why she was brought there. Lupin hands her a letter. As soon as Ami read it, she couldn't believe her eyes. The older brother bought their house back. She is worried that he earned the money in some illegal way. However, her brother cools her ardor, saying that he invented a potion, and thanks to this, he was able to buy the estate. Besides, the girl no longer needs to work, because from now on her brother will provide for her. Ami had no idea Andreas worked so hard. She was so cruel to him because he sold the ring, that she ran away last time and didn't want to talk to him. This brings the girl to tears. Andreas promises to act like a responsible brother from now on and fully understands the girl's reaction. She continues to apologize, saying that she always believed in him, but that time she just got really angry. Watching the restoration of the Cromwell family, the old servant sheds a stingy tear. Andreas does not stay at the estate, he returns to the hostel. There on the floor, he draws a bloody necromantic circle, in the middle of which Timur lies. Andreas reads the book given to him by that same powerful necromancer. Thanks to the trait he gained from the fight against Paimon, he can learn necromancy much faster. In addition, he recently received the Enlightenment trait, which affects his study of any theory. Now he can learn any spell from this book many times faster. And this time he can try to summon the spirit in the form of Timur. Everything should go well because Andreas prepared carefully and checked everything 10 times. He uses the primordial necromancy spell Summon Spirit. If all goes well and with the addition of the evolving nickel, Andreas will be equal in strength to the entire squad. During his lifetime, Timur sent shivers across the entire continent. Andreas succeeds in performing the ritual, and the spirit level becomes legendary. Timur's high level makes him a fighting spirit, and thanks to the transcendence of his level, part of Timur's former ego returned. Besides his ego, his traits include being a master of fistfighting and also a berserker. Timur rises with the loudest roar. If Andreas hadn't cast soundproofing magic on his room, the whole neighborhood would have heard it. Timur kneels before his summoner. After some time, the time for the second exam begins. The whole class was taken to the snowy mountains of Vilbor. The same teacher is going to tell the students about the essence of the exam. This time in the test, they will have to survive and collect points. They will spend 72 hours on this mountain and collect points that are hidden on it. All students are given bracelets, which also give points. And if you collect decorations from other students, you can accumulate points. However, if the bracelet is damaged, the participant will be disqualified. At this point, the explanation ends and the teacher asks the students to put on blindfolds. They will then be accompanied by the leader of each group to the starting point. For about a day, Andreas wandered around the mountain on his own, trying to survive. And so he climbs to the next peak, where there should be flat terrain. It will be convenient to attack and defend there, and you can also place a new base. However, when he climbs up, he sees the already familiar Diana. She is protecting herself from the snowstorm using spells. Moreover, it uses both terrain search and barrier, which is only available to high-class magicians. However, the girl runs out of mana, and the spell weakens, and she falls into the snow. Andreas realizes that if he takes her bracelet, he will get points and get rid of a strong opponent. However, if he gets her help, he will also be able to get the highest score. Diana notices an approaching figure, but does not yet recognize her interlocutor. Andreas starts talking to her, and Diana realizes who is in front of her. He tries to convey to the girl that in such conditions, using mana so recklessly can be very problematic. But Diana believes that she doesn't need anything except her bracelet, and there's no point in pretending that it will give her the opportunity to leave and some useful advice. However, she must have enough strength to cope with it. This is what Diana thought until she finally ran out of mana. Andreas tries to offer her cooperation, but Diana only tries to crawl away from him on her heels and asks him not to come near her. Andreas is even a little hurt by the fact that she so strongly does not want to unite with him. Finally, Diana is ready to listen to him, and the guy offers her to become a team, but the girl does not understand why he needs this. He understands that he will be in danger alone, and if something goes wrong, it would be nice to have a partner. Diana agrees that this is true, but because of Andreas' past before he was Makoto, she can't trust him. The girl tries to uncover his motives, but Andreas resorts to another trick. After rummaging through the bags, he finds a package of food. It turns out to be chocolate, and as soon as Diana sees it, all the anger leaves her body, and only natural instincts remain. Andreas again offers her to cooperate, and the girl tries to refuse. But hunger takes over, and she agrees. At this time, on the same mountain, two monsters are indiscriminately killing students. Apparently, they are looking for someone, but still without success. The larger monster justifies himself by saying that he has poor eyesight and therefore cannot find the right candidate. The smaller goblin keeps telling him that they need a guy with green hair. I wonder who that might be. Despite the terrible weather conditions they are in, they have been paid to search, so they have no choice. They will have to continue. They were hired by a certain Kidwell, who communicates with them through black magic. He overhears their disgruntled conversations and intervenes in the dialogue, reminding them that they don't have much time and that they need to find their order as quickly as possible. The performers say they have made inquiries about the man Kidwell is looking for, and he is just a student. The mage replies that the reasons for hiring them are not their business, and let the mercenaries carry out Jester's orders, a familiar name. This is where the connection ends, but before continuing on our way, the goblin suggests we rest a little. But Ogre disagrees with him. He thinks it's better to continue following the scent, which only comes from the students or their leaders. This means that if they continue to follow it, sooner or later they will come across their order. Besides, after graduating from the academy, many of them will become enemies of monsters. This means that the more people they kill, the safer it will be in the future. In fact, their employer does not expect the monsters to actually catch Andreas. Yes, we already realize that there is only one green-haired student here. He just wants the two monsters to distract the students, while the other mages plant a bomb on the top of the mountain. This will allow them to bury Jester's target. Meanwhile, Diana and Andreas continue to advance up the career ladder. They took the bracelets from two more students, who were trapped as if they were wild animals. Diana is surprised by Andreas's abilities. In addition, he moves very well in harsh mountainous terrain, which is not like a mage. He had changed a lot since their last interactions and was literally a different person. She finally decides to ask him a question directly and does it very directly, asking how he has changed so much, because before he was a complete idiot. Andreas replies that if he had remained the same, he would have lost everything. He really was a complete idiot who didn't think about his sister, even though she was his only family member. But Andreas realized everything and decided that he would improve and work hard. Thanks to this, he discovered that he also had a gift. Andreas apologizes to Diana for all the bad things he did to her. Fueled by team spirit, they both decide to aim for first place. Ivy watches them from behind a tree, silently thinking that Andreas didn't blink an eye during the previous exam when he killed people, and that his transformation from an asshole to a better version of himself seems unrealistic. However, she finds it interesting. Andreas and Diana head purposefully to the next place on the map where they can get points. They have about 3 minutes left to get there, and they must be prepared for enemy attack. But the opponents they encounter are not the ones they expected. The same ogre and goblin fall out from around the corner onto the guys, and they see the crippled students behind the monsters that attack them. The goblin announces that they have finally found their target. Diana doesn't understand what they're talking about, and Goblin continues to reason that their patience with his teammate has finally paid off. Andreas wants to know how they know him, but the monsters only want him dead. Andreas asks them to let the remaining surviving students go and talk without any unnecessary witnesses. Diana believes they should fight together, but Andreas asks her to take care of the surviving students. Moreover, he is confident in his victory and does not hide this from the goblin and the ogre. However, the sweet couple is satisfied with the fact that Andreas is going to go with them alone, and the whole trio leaves. They move a little further towards the mountain range and disappear from Diana's view. There their dialogue continues, during which the goblin reasons that they should cut off Andreas' head in order to bring it as evidence. The ogre attacks the boy, swinging his axe at him, but Andreas easily dodges the blow. The goblin then attacks him with his dagger and delivers several blows with both hands, which Andreas also dodges. The ogre swings his axe at him again, but Andreas parries the blow with his sword, causing the axe to simply fly off, leaving the club in the ogre's hand. The opponents do not understand why the mage uses a sword, and Andreas asks Mantos and Glue, as his opponents are called, to abandon these stereotypes. The goblin doesn't understand how Andreas knows their names. The green-haired man promises to answer his question if he tells him who sent them. Andreas calls on Timur and Nickel, and even if the opponents refuse to answer him, he will force them. Andreas hears a familiar name from Goblin's lips and stops Nickel. He orders him to kill anyone who tries to escape, and in the meantime, they will try to continue the dialogue. Andreas is attacked by an ogre. Now he will fight him hand-to-hand, and Andreas will use the skills of his fighting prowess, acquired in his past life. Even without weapons, Andreas easily deals with two opponents who are superior to him in hand-to-hand combat. He knocks the dagger out of Goblin's hands and intends to show him how to properly use a dagger. The goblin tries to block all of Andreas's attacks, but they push him further and further away while the orc comes to his senses. Finally, with a series of blows from his dagger, Andreas finally throws the goblin further into the snow. At this time, the orc rises, holding his head. Andreas hopes that he is not going to give up, since Nickel and Timur have not yet had the opportunity to play, and they are waiting for this. At this time, Diana waited for help. The girl who arrived provides medical services to the surviving student. The other two, unfortunately, died. The female manager believes that it would be better for her and Diana not to separate. However, the dark-haired girl cannot allow other students to suffer. The leader does not dare to stop her, but asks her not to catch the monster's eye. Diana sets out to find Andreas with great enthusiasm, and Andreas had already brought the orc and goblin to a state of near unconsciousness. He's still trying to get the customer's name out of them, but Orc thinks death is better than an answer to the question. Andreas doesn't mind killing him and asks Nickel to give him the sword. He will be able to find out in another way, even if the opponents are dead. Trying to save his teammate, Goblin replies that Jester sent them. Reuben. Mantos, who is an orc, objects to what Glue, who is a goblin, answered Greenhaired's question. However, he does not think that they owe anything to those who treat them like animals. Besides, they were not sent alone. There are other attackers. Andreas had assumed that someone from the council was behind all this, but he hadn't expected that Jester himself would be the instigator. Besides, he should have been afraid of Salem. However, despite Blondin's threats, Jester still attacked. This means he was sure that no one would know about Andreas's death. Andreas asks where the rest of the mercenaries are. However, Glue doesn't know about this because they don't want to cross Rodlin's path. He replies that perhaps the others want to cause an avalanche. Andreas concludes that Jester wants to make it look like an accident. The goblin urges his brother to get out of here as quickly as possible so as not to be drawn into all the mess. But Andreas isn't going to let them go after killing so many students. He didn't say he would spare their lives. Diana almost reached the top, but someone attacks her. This is a crowd of magicians who are probably just about to cause a landslide. One of their leaders is the same black mage who had spoken with the goblin and the ogre before. Diana threatens everyone gathered with her magic. And it's not for nothing that she brags, because her ability to use double magic surprises the leader. The girl uses ice magic in a rage and disables opponents one by one who do not have time to dodge. The black magician notes that her mastery of magic at such an age is frightening. However, for him, she is still not an opponent. He grabs the eye he used to communicate with monsters and attaches it to his head. Diana realizes that she has encountered the dark magician. The eye, like a parasite, envelops its owner. This causes such a massive release of magic that even Ivy, who is dealing with the corpses of other students, senses a presence. Diana continues to try to fight back and defend herself from multiple attackers at once. If this continues, her mana will run out again very soon. The man mocks her, saying that it is all due to the difference in experience, and Diana adds that he simply added an assistant to his team. This angers the man, and he threatens to steal Diana's things. And she, calling him an old man, says that such threats only make him look like a big clown. But Diana overdid it with her magic and earned herself a bloody nose. Her opponent tries to take advantage of this and immediately attacks, directing his tentacles straight at the girl. But a certain swordsman arrives in time and deflects the blows, protecting the girl. The man in the mask, like Bloody Ed's, I wonder who it could be, introduces himself as a mercenary hired by Rodlin. He asks Diana to run away while he sorts everything out. Diana refuses to retreat because the mercenary can't handle everyone on his own, to which he replies that he is not the one the attackers need. But Andreas thinks to himself that he cannot call upon Nicelius and Timur now. He tells the girl that the attackers want to cause a landslide and asks her to leave the battlefield as soon as possible. The bug-eyed tentacle parasite does not understand where the mercenary got such information from, and Andreas doesn't understand why he should reveal all his cards to the death row inmate. This time the guy was rummaging around with some really vulnerable opponent, and with screams he immediately pounced on the swordsman. Andreas lunges forward, cutting through the tentacles that are attacking him. There are also opponents of magic who additionally influence the guy with their magic, but he still successfully deals with everyone who gets in his way. Diana is amazed at the swordsman's speed, and the tentacle monster charges its eye on its forehead with some kind of red energy and prepares to shoot. The girl warns Andreas about this under a mask, but an explosion immediately occurs. With this explosion, Kidwell leaves a huge crater. But it was not to be, because Andreas had already plunged his sword into his throat, thereby killing the carrier of the parasite. But the parasite himself is still alive, and he continues to attack the guy in the mask. Diana asks if he is okay, and Andreas asks her not to come closer. He reasons that the owner of the body is already dead, which means the monster has taken over his body. The parasite needs mana, and by tearing Kidwell's mouth apart, it devours one of the mages on their side. Frozen by this sight, Andreas and Diana quickly dodge the monster's next attack. He pursues them, throwing snow and stones after the boys along the way. Andreas hides Diana behind a rock and asks her to retreat as quickly as possible while he distracts the monster. He immediately pounces on the parasite with his sword, continuing to chop at its tentacles. Diana doesn't know who's behind the mask, but this man saved her life, and she can't just throw him off and run away. So the girl accumulates all her remaining mana and creates an ice spell. It compresses energy to make it as thin and fast as possible, and creates an ice spear. Andreas thinks to himself that if he could summon Nickel and Timur, he would easily deal with the enemy. However, Diana still does not leave and does not allow him to take advantage of this opportunity. The girl chooses the right moment and throws an ice spear straight at the monster. She stabs him in the side, tearing off a chunk of flesh, exposing a mana core that must be destroyed. Andreas realizes this and rushes towards the monster, but he was too hasty and came too close. To restore its lost strength, the monster attacks its still living teammate, first one and then all the others. The magicians are still trying to bring the long-dead Kidwell to his senses, for which everyone turns into shashlik. Diana doesn't understand why the monster is attacking its own, and Andreas concludes that it is absorbing mana. He sucks all the life juices out of the living and the dead, if there is anything to suck, and he rejoices excessively in this. If the sounds he makes can be called joyful. Even Andreas understands that things are bad. While he ponders his next steps, Diana casts ice magic shields on him and sharpens his sword. And even acceleration on Andreas' legs. She spends all her remaining mana on this and is left without strength. He once again insists that the girl run away, and he himself rushes into battle, while noticing how light his body had become thanks to her spells. But the magic-filled monster has no plans to retreat, despite Andreas' strengthening. He attacks him with his tentacles again and again, forcing the swordsman to constantly dodge. He needs to find the core as soon as possible to win. He makes another cut into the parasite's body with his sword, but it doesn't go too deep. But then help comes from where you least expect it. Someone cuts the monster in half with one swing of his sword, and it falls dead. The masked man meets with Ivy, which asks the one who he is. Andreas is more frightened by her appearance than by the entire fight he had fought before. The girl repeats her question and says that if he refuses to answer, she will kill her opponent herself and remove this mask from him. However, their conversation is interrupted by the shaking of the ground. Andreas, under a mask, tells Ivy that the dark magicians have set up a magic circle to explode. If it is not removed right now, many students will suffer. Ivy thinks he's bluffing, but the swordsman tells him he's about to explode, because of which the girl gets distracted and Andreas quickly retreats. Ivy promises to find and kill him, but the explosion looms too dangerously over them, and she goes to deal with a more important threat. At this time, the distant Andreas finally takes off his mask. While he hides behind a tree, Ivy deals with the magic circle that the dark magicians built. At this time, in a certain ancient castle not far from the Strait of Tenera, a dark magician performs necromantic spells over a mermaid and a dead bird. This is the same jester who is waiting for his order to kill Andreas to be carried out. However, something went wrong, and Salem comes to visit him. Jester is unhappy that he came without an invitation, and Salem tells the mage that the only one here who has no manners is Jester. If he had manners, he wouldn't have pulled such a trick. Jester pretends not to understand what the blonde is talking about, which angers one of the Great Ten even more. Salem's patience wears thin, and he suggests cremating Jester. The same one asks once again what Salem needs. The man replies that Jester knows the answer to that question. If Jester had let it slip and insisted that what happened was an accident, he would have been in a lot of trouble right now. However, in exchange for his stubborn silence, Salem offers another service. If Jester lends him the artifact for a week, he will turn a blind eye to his misdeed this time. At the academy, Andreas learns that the news reported how Ivy dealt with terrorists and a dark magician, and also that Diana was saved by an unknown person. For a while, he decides to keep a low profile, as there will be a lot of noise. Ivy was just waiting for him near the knight's training ground. She is unhappy that she had to come all the way here to find an ordinary magician. The girl invites Andreas to talk. He is afraid that she recognized him back then in the mountains. The blonde asks if Andreas understands why she is here, to which the guy answers positively. She is surprised by his straightforwardness, but it will be even easier to conduct this dialogue. But Andreas ruins her expectations by saying that he is not yet ready to start a relationship with the opposite sex, for which Ivy immediately sends him away. Ivy is interested in what happened to the two monsters that attacked him and the other students. Andreas tells her the same thing he told the investigators. The guy ran away when the monsters were distracted. At the same time, Andreas is glad that Diana did not tell anyone that Ogre and Goblin were going to kill Green Voice. Ivy doesn't believe his stories, to which Andreas once again replies that it's true, and he is already in a hurry to retreat, but Ivy attacks him. He dodges her sword strike and parries the second blow with his own. Both opponents fly to opposite sides of the court, and Ivy is surprised that the bony mage could block the blow of the senior professor of the knight's faculty. Moreover, with a sword in its sheath, this further fuels her interest and distrust of Andreas, to which the guy asks her if she considers him a dark magician. This conversation is overheard by Vivian, who thinks about Andreas' words. Ivy replies that yes, she does suspect him of this, because every time, when he deals with dark magicians, the guy behaves suspiciously. She thinks to herself that although the voice and appearance are different from the masked swordsman, the body of the deposit is the same as Andreas. She's sure it was him, but she doesn't understand how he did it. Plus, Ivy thinks Andreas lied to the investigator. She is also interested in what he did to Vivian, that the girl changed so much after the midterms. Vivian, who is eavesdropping on them, is a little worried by this way of putting the question. Andreas takes a moment to think about this answer, then replies that he simply saved her. According to him, he simply entered the barrier and pulled the girl out of there. That's all. This finally confirms Vivian's suspicions that Andreas is Mr. Fairy. But her thoughts are interrupted by Ivy's scream, who thinks he's talking nonsense. She points the sword at Andreas again and accuses him of it. What a non-entity cannot calmly enter and exit the barrier of a dark magician? But Vivian finally intervenes in their conversation, defending Andreas. She confirms that it was he who saved her then. This cools Ivy's ardor a little, and she sheathes her sword, but promises to keep an eye on Andreas. The guy thanks Vivian, and she just looks at him with puppy eyes and is glad that she was right after all. And at the Cromwell estate, Ami is sorting through the numerous documents that have accumulated. She is informed that the workers have finished with the construction of the estate. The girl thanks the maid for this, because it must have been a difficult task since the house had been abandoned for so many years. The maid brings her coffee and sweets and says that they thought it was wrong to enter their father's private office first. Perhaps the children should go in there before them. Ami agrees with this idea and stands in a stupor in front of the door to her father's office. She recalls how, as a child, she was often scolded for playing hide-and-seek there with her brother. It was so long ago that going in there now might bring back memories. But when she opens the door, she sees a terrible mess. However, no one looked after the estate, so this is not surprising. The girl finds an old cracked photograph on the floor. On the train, Andreas is heading somewhere. Right in the carriage, he is overtaken by Salem, who is not very good at disguising himself. Andreas scolds him for letting the continent's best dark mage show up in such a public place. Salem doesn't understand why he's complaining here, since his supposed mentor personally came to get the baby. The blonde man came to talk to Andreas about his double core. He says that in theory, the guy can use the energy from two cores and alternate between them. Salem came to the train to teach Andreas his own method of energy transfer, which he called translation. After just 10 minutes, Andreas had more or less mastered the technique. He didn't think it was possible to do it so quickly, and once again confirmed to himself that Salem was an incredible discovery. The blonde asks Andreas to continue practicing and is about to leave the train through the open window, but Andreas stops him. He asks if Salem knows anything about his father and the entire Cromwell family in general. Casually, as if this were common knowledge, Salem replies that Andreas Kane's father was a student of Morn, that very same powerful necromancer. This leaves Andreas in shock. However, Salem will not give him more information, since explaining all this is too stressful. Andreas doesn't have time to object before Salem leaves the train. Neither in the game itself, nor after entering its world, did Andreas even suspect that his father was a black magician. There was no mention of this anywhere. It's a good thing he's heading to the estate now, and the house can be searched in an attempt to find something. He comes to his father's already clean and tidy office. Ami replaced the old furniture with new one, as everything else was in terrible condition. Now this office can be used, but the girl left the most important thing. This is the very photograph she found. It depicts the entire Cromwell family, including their previously deceased mother and later deceased father. This gives Andreas a strange feeling of nostalgia for other people's emotions. As soon as he touches the photograph in his sister's hands, a magic spell is triggered and a secret door in the closet opens. The guy comes to the conclusion that if the spell is activated only when the Cromwell children touch it together. So inside the room is Kane's legacy, some kind of will. And first you need to go there to find out what incredible secrets the estate holds. Andreas volunteers to go first and check and asks his sister to wait outside. The girl wants to go there with her brother and not leave him alone, but he insists that Ami may not be able to cope with the magic hidden there. And the girl reluctantly agrees to stay upstairs. She asks her brother to be careful and leaves her father's office. Andreas goes down into the room that appeared behind the book opening. On the stairs closer to the room he is descending into, the guy senses an object of dark magic, the same strong feeling he felt from Lenya's page. Descending into the depths of the corridor, he sees some kind of tree. There are many magical flowers growing around it. The system notifies Andreas that he is looking at the zero code of the apocalypse, the 8th of the 7 known. This is the purest original sin that must bear fruit. Andreas had never seen him in the game. There was a letter left by Kane on the tree. As soon as Andreas picks it up, the letter dissipates and the guy himself is transported to some other place. An unknown figure comes up to him from behind and places his hand on the guy's head, because of which he sees other people's memories. Andreas is shown memories of his father, about how the great necromancer Monte gave Kayem the seed of a tree, which he successfully planted. He sees memories of the first sprout appearing, which he showed to the council members. Andreas watches as his father holds the dying mother of the Cromwell family in his arms, and it is not clear whether he killed her or someone else. There is blood on his hands from the dagger that was in her body. According to the memories, the emperor also targeted the children of Cain, and he tried his best to protect them and cast a spell on the family portrait. Seeing all this, Andreas understands what happened to his family. Dark magicians in collusion with the empire. And Salem was right when he said that the emperor left Father Andreas in the leadership of the necromancer Morsha. And together with this man, Cain studied dark magic and successfully raised the original Greek. However, after this he was disposed of, as the man was no longer needed by the emperor. Also, the death of his wife and a mysterious illness, and later the decline of the family, led to the decline of the father of the family himself. He soon realized that the emperor was behind everything that happened to him and decided to take revenge. To do this, he hid the primal sin in places that only followers of the Grey Blood family could enter. The father turns to Andreas and asks him if he has looked at his memories well. Turning to face him, the boy sees something in front of him that looks exactly like Cain Cromwell, but is not. This something calls him by the name Makoto Kenshiro. Andreas immediately draws his sword and points it at his interlocutor. He is annoyed that Andreas, or Makoto in this case, did not immediately understand who was standing in front of him, because he is a gamer after all. He says the line from the end of the game that every developer says, "Thank you for playing our game." This phrase must have reminded Makoto of something, and he remembers that the phone call before which he entered the game world ended like this. Andreas, or Makoto, realizes that the person standing in front of him is the developer who brought him here. He asks how he likes the world of mortal sins and calls his creation an amazing fantasy. Makoto wants to know why he was moved here, to which the developer replies that there is no particular reason, because he simply wanted the man to complete the game. Makoto doesn't understand what he means by this. Besides, he had already seen the destruction of this world many times, was any of the playable characters, and had completed the game more than once. But everyone ended up in the apocalypse ending, where the world was destroyed by the emissions of original sin. Makoto doesn't understand what this is about, because if you collect all the deadly sins, the primary sin, and defeat the last boss, the world will be saved. The developer replies that this is only what was available to Makoto as a player, because after his departure, the consciousness of the original sin still remains in the game, and after that, the world is destroyed in any case. In order to save him, one must take possession of the original sin, and for this one will only need Cain's blood and his flesh. The system immediately asks Andreas for the blood of the Cromwells in order to enter into a contract with the original sin. Andreas may be a useless jerk in the story, but he is one of the few people who can enter this place before the primal sin blossoms. 6 months after the tree gains consciousness, it will leave the Cromwell's domain and find its host. All these words answer Andreas' question about why he was reborn as such a low-grade character. The developer wants Makoto, in Andreas' body, to make a pact with the original sin and become its bearer. And in order to get the good ending to the game, he will need to feed all the deadly sins to the tree and later tame it. And even though Andreas may not be able to handle this taming, it is the only way for the entire world to survive, including Andreas. At this point, the developer hurries to take his leave, leaving his body in the form of a projection of Cain Cromwell. And the father finally turns to his son and says that he believes in him. He finally asks to take care of his sister. Andreas takes off his glove and cuts his palm with the sword. He reasons that he has not found himself in one of those stories about otherworldly reincarnation. And even though in this game he is forced to work for free, he really has no other choice, so he will have to figure it all out. The guy puts his bloody hand to the tree and makes a contract with it. Now the purest original sin had taken up residence in his body and recognized Andreas as its master. Thanks to the tree contract, Andreas' mana regeneration is increased by 144%, and as he collects all the other deadly sins, his abilities will only become stronger. Andreas says goodbye to Cain Cromwell as the father of the other half of his soul and promises him to take care of his sister. The tree disappears and Andreas hopes that his father is at peace and promises to avenge him. We were just remembering the Emperor, and here he appeared again. This time he interrogates the lieutenant, the head of intelligence, precisely about original sin. The man replies that they have been investigating what the head of the Cromwells was doing before his death, but have not been able to find anything at this point. This causes the Emperor to become angry, and he himself comes to the conclusion that Cain must have entrusted this to one of his relatives. And sooner or later, the deal with the tree will be concluded. He realizes that at the moment, there is only one young Cromwell who is capable of this. At the moment, they had no need to rush, and he would still give the head of intelligence a little more time to continue surveillance. However, it would be best to start with the mortal sins. The Emperor wants information about the cult of Jafir. He believes that they have one of the deadly sins, to which he is told that the cult is exhibiting suspicious activity, and very soon they will gather enough people to perform the ritual. Somewhere inside a building that looks like the Colosseum, unknown people are talking about a festival that will take place this year. They carefully prepared everything for some event. They calculated everything from the number of guards to the entry points, and also learned about the underground rooms under the arena. Also, a lower-ranking worker reports to his commander, who resembles Don Flamingo, that they may need to sacrifice many to summon Lord Jafir. The pink guy praises his employee for a great job and promises to introduce him to good girls if everything goes smoothly. This very employee turns out to be the recently missing Khazar, who has finally become a cultist, as Andreas predicted. Or his boss offers to get to know him better if he is not satisfied with his previous proposal. Finally, the gay jokes are over and real gays have appeared. Khazar says that this is unnecessary because he only used the help of his friends from the academy. Earlier, Khazar spoke about a good candidate, and apparently he meant Vivian. However, the conversation with her led nowhere, and the girl was not interested. She said that she had found her other spiritual foundation. The man in pink leaves all the work to Khazar, saying that he will not be able to join him because of his important business. In the dorm, Andreas once again studies his characteristics. A week ago, he returned from the Krumgoloff mansion and was worried that the original sin might cause him some problems. However, nothing has happened yet. But now, after he learned his family's secret, the guy's increasingly worried about his sister. If there wasn't something brewing at the academy that he knows about from the game's plot, he would have stayed with her. However, now he is needed more here. On one of the last days of the festival at the academy, that same cult is supposed to carry out a terrorist attack on the arena. And a lot of people can die because of a stupid attempt to summon an evil god. And this cult must be gotten rid of before the events of the game affect all the others. Already important to Andreas, not just game characters. He wants to complete the game and protect the game characters. In addition, it is possible that other apocalyptic codes are collaborating with this cult, and this matter needs to be investigated. Now, Andreas has a lot of things to do since he was given the original sin. However, this is not a reason to skip training with Nickel. So he summons a skeleton from his vault, but this time something new happens. The original sin in Andreas's body reacts to Nickel as diligent laziness. Despite the fact that the skeleton no longer has the artifact, for some reason changes occur in Andreas' body. The guy comes to the conclusion that because Nickel spent so much time holding the artifact of laziness, the original sin reacted to him in this way. But the changes do not occur in Andreas's body, but rather in Nickel. After some time, the system notifies Andreas that original sin and diligent laziness are no longer connected. And now Nickel's characteristics have improved quite a bit. Despite the fact that he has hardly changed in appearance, he has become much stronger. To celebrate, Andreas asks if they can cancel the training, to which Nickel shakes his head. After some time, disguised as best he could, Andreas walks near the arena. He's going to find cult members who are looking for new members. If he remembers everything correctly, then this is exactly how it should happen. However, he does not yet see any new faces, or rather familiar faces. Just thinking about this, the guy sees Khazar in the crowd. He adds 2 + 2 and decides to follow him. Khazar goes down into the sewer hatch and Andreas follows him after a while. On his way down, he comes across a half-ogre girl who is also a member of the cult. He instantly renders her unconscious. As Andreas suspected, Khazar, along with the rest of the cult members, is preparing for a terrorist attack. The guy calls Nickel and Timur. He leaves a second one for observation and takes the skeleton with him for reconnaissance. Nickel and Andreas head deeper into the sewers. After some time, they come to a room where the cultists are gathering with their explosives. Khazar says that although it was difficult to get hold of explosives, now they have everything in their hands. And there are only a couple of days left to install it. The guy hopes that his efforts will promote him when suddenly Andreas flies out. He immediately blows off the head of some cultists. Khazar orders his servants to kill the spy. Andreas is instantly attacked by a crowd of people, masked and unmasked. But what unites them is that they all have little clothing. However, the guy has already learned enough to wield a sword and can deal with the entire crowd without any problems. Therefore, Khazar himself rushes to help his brothers. He instantly gets his head cut off without even having time to reveal himself as a character. Andreas is saved from an attack from behind by Nickel. At this point, they had practically completed the cleanup. All that remains is to collect all the explosives. Andreas is just thinking about bringing Timur back when Timur himself returns. But not by his own efforts. Someone throws him through the upper passage in the sewer. This someone turns out to be the very same chief cultist in pink robes. He decided to drop by to see his guys since he was able to finish his business early. But the unfortunate thing is that he can only see their heads. The man is very disappointed with Khazar's death, and now Andreas is his main target. Finally, we know the name of this man. His name is Payat Kabon, and he is one of the leaders of the cult that was supposed to appear only in the middle of the game. His level is at the level of an Aura Master, and this is bad news for Andreas. At the moment, he is even stronger than Ivy. Both Timur and Nickel may not be able to cope with him, given such low evolutionary data. Also, their abilities are not suitable for this fight, as Payat's skills increase his physical strength and muscles, making blows and cuts ineffective on him. Payat, meanwhile, assumes his blow-absorbing form and is already preparing to fight Andreas. He warns him that he saw that the guy is strong enough and does not plan to hold back. After the warning, Payat immediately attacks Andreas. Timur blocks his attack and holds the man back by clasping his hands with him. Nickel tries to strike the man with his sword, but he absorbs all the blows. He says they just tickle him. Andreas himself decides to join the battle. He's like he's an Attack on Titan, and he's aiming for the back of Payat's neck. However, he doesn't give a damn and throws his head back. And with a powerful blow to the forehead, he hits Timur on the top of his head. Then he pushes him away with a powerful kick somewhere into the wall, and he himself goes to attack Andreas. The guy imbues his sword with mana aura and prepares to fight off Payat. But Nickel's blow sends the man's hand crashing into the ground, punching a hole in it. At the same time, Nickel's sword breaks from this blow. By this point, Andreas had already charged the sword with enough energy. He tries the same blow again, realizing where Payat's weak spot is. But the blow doesn't go through. The man turns and heads towards Andreas. The guy uses an earthen shield to block the attack. But Don Flamingo gets rid of this obstacle without any problems. The blast wave throws Andreas back. But he doesn't manage to fly far enough, and Payat grabs him by the hair. With one hand and with the other hand, creating another JoJo reference in this manhwa, he delivers a bunch of punches. He hits like Star Platinum Jotaro Kujo. This repeated series of blows causes Andreas' mask to fall. At the sight of his cute, battered, bloody face, Payat blushes. He makes it clear that Andreas is exactly his type. Such comments do not please Andreas' two constant companions. Nickel and Timur pounce on the man, but he easily blocks their blows and throws them away. He still holds Andreas in one hand. Once he gets rid of the attackers, he grabs the green-haired man with both hands and begins to strangle him. Andreas feels his bones crunch under that grip, and Payat just loves the sounds he makes. A completely defenseless guy tries to figure out what he can do, because there must be some way. Original Sin answers his call. He requests the ability to use the laziness skill. Andreas does not know what risks the use will entail. However, he has no choice and agrees to use laziness. Payat feels a surge of some kind of energy and does not understand what the sound is and where it comes from. The blood from the corpses begins to flow towards him and rises towards Andreas. Payat senses some kind of ominous presence, because of which he lets go of the guy and jumps away from him. Andreas increases all his stats related to mana and magic to 666%. He also temporarily gains the talent of a genius of magic, which is just right for him, considering the enemy. Due to the effects of laziness, it hurts to move, and he is too lazy to think. Andreas is too lazy to even open his eyes. He uses shields made of earth that cut off Payat's arm instead of a sword. Even Andreas's ability to maintain his breathing and heartbeat had now dropped significantly under the influence of laziness. He continues to use earth magic against Payat. The guy drops huge chunks of earth and stones into it. He blocks the blows and stays on his feet. Andreas plans to kill the man as quickly as possible and then rest quickly. Payat hears the ground shaking and dust falling above him. Meanwhile, above the ground, Bart feels a surge of energy, but does not yet understand what it means. In the arena, parallel to the fight between Andreas and Payat, a fight between ordinary people is taking place. And in the arena's stands, Bart is present with his daughter Diana. They watch the performance, but the girl's father is clearly different. He sensed the presence of dark magic during the energy surge. Against dark magic was installed around the arena, and it worked against the elder Alvin. Diana asks her father what is bothering him, but he leaves her without an answer. He says that he has some business to attend to and leaves. Andreas, meanwhile, continues to fight against Payat. He uses stone spears against him with his dual core, constantly generating mana. Payat notices that the guy is using basic magic and calls Andreas's possession of the boulders some kind of show-off. He understands that they won't even scratch him, but his statement is interrupted by Nickel attacking him. Payat doesn't like this, and he tries to fight off the skeleton like an annoying mosquito. At this time, Andreas finishes forming his arrows, and Payat does not even expect that he will be able to kill him with a couple of shots. But then Timur intervenes, and instead of attacking, he holds the armored man under his shoulders. At this point, Andreas is ready to take the shot. He shoots arrows at Payat, and they pierce his body. At this point, the effect of laziness ends and Andreas gets his payback. Now he is unable to move his body, use neither mana nor aura, and also takes heavy damage. He falls to the ground bleeding and feels like he's been torn to pieces. Andreas realizes that he must stand up and finish off Payat, but due to a lack of mana, even Timur and Nickel, unfortunately, are sent to storage. And while Andreas is in a semi-conscious state, the system notifies him that a pre-evolution target has been detected. He himself is this target, and his chance of evolution is 33%. Andreas jokes that this evolution will be his souvenir to the grave and agrees to the terms before losing consciousness. At the same time, Bart goes down into the sewers and finds chopped-up cultists in vulgar clothes. He immediately understands whose handiwork this is. However, he does not understand why they are here. But they must be somehow connected to the energy he felt earlier. Clad in a ball of energy, Bart flies off to adventure. Apparently, there is such a tradition in the Alvin family. He senses a faint trace of dark magic and heads towards its source. The master of the magic tower arrives at the scene of the massacre and finds the finished-off Payat, piles of gunpowder and chopped-up cultists. He understands that a terrorist attack could have happened here that would have killed a lot of people, including his children. He also notices Andreas lying unconscious in a pile of blood and doesn't understand what the guy's doing there. However, the place where it lies has the greatest trace of dark magic. To his surprise, Bart realizes that the boy inherited the original sin from Cain. Andreas' evolution ends and his double core trait disappears. Instead, a vessel line appears. The guy himself wakes up, not remembering whether he took it. Andreas wakes up in the chambers. Sitting next to him is Bart, who tells the guy that 2 weeks have passed. And so Andreas made a full recovery, although he didn't give much hope with his wounds. Bart begins a dialogue with Andreas, who has just woken up, with an immediate interrogation. He wonders what the guy was doing in the sewers. Andreas understands that it is too early to tell Alvin about what is happening and comes up with a story. He tells how he was walking next to a stream of water and saw a fight between suspicious people. He tried to escape, but was eventually drawn in. Bart doesn't trust this story and wants to know where the rest of the people went. When he arrived, only Andreas was at the scene of the battle. The guy remains silent, not wanting to say another word. Bart directly asks the guy what he is hiding, but Andreas denies it. Sir Alvin remembers Cain Cromwell asking him to take care of his children and decides to retreat. And instead of interrogating Andreas, he intends to catch the cult's lackey, who is hiding somewhere in the city. Besides, Bart doubts that a man who barely survived could have any useful information. Even Andreas is surprised at how easily the man backed down. But at this point, the magician asks for his forgiveness and quickly leaves. He reminds Andreas of the argument over the creation of the potion. He has 1 week left to fulfill this condition, and Bart is looking forward to it. Andreas understands that Bart knows who he is, but for some reason he let him go very easily. He also recalls that Salem spoke as if he didn't care if Bart found out about his dark magic activities. Based on his father's recollections, Andreas is confident that Bart knows that the head of the Alvin family understands at least approximately what is going on. But Andreas's thoughts on the classics are interrupted by someone. The children of the Alvin family enter the room. This time it wasn't just Diana. She and Carlos came to visit the boy. The father told them that the boy had come to his senses, so they went to check on him. Carlos is pleased to have the three of us together, like in the good old days. He asks if Andreas thinks the same. The guy thinks that all his attempts to save his loved ones in his past life ended in failure. But this time, he will be able to do everything differently. And yes, he is glad that the three of them were able to get together again, like in childhood, because now he will definitely protect what is dear to him. Since Andreas lay there for 2 weeks before regaining consciousness, he decides to look through the news of the past days. He notices that Bart has kept a good check on them. No record of a cult attack has been found. However, it is not surprising that such news will not be disseminated. Considering that the threat had penetrated into the very heart of the academy, this would have caused a great stir. Meanwhile, Andreas reaches his destination. He came to the magic tower. Apparently, a week has passed and Bart is waiting for him to report on the potion production. He is met by a tower worker and taken to Sir Alvin. Andreas arrived just in time, and Bart was ready to try out his new creation. He acts as if the incident in the sewers never happened, which leaves Andreas confused about whose side Bart is on. The man tries out Andreas' new offering without the help of the Potion Council. He realizes that this is a radiation potion, in which Andreas got rid of the side effects, just like with his previous potion. Andreas doesn't deny that he thought Bart would understand everything, and the head of the magic tower calls him impudent for the fact that the guy decided to test him. However, Andreas' surprises do not end there. After all, he made another potion, where he also removed the side effects. Andreas surprises both the tower worker and its ruler with this. They both didn't expect that he would be able to make 2 potions in such a short time. Andreas says that this is all thanks to his material and moral support. Sir Alvin realizes that Andreas made the potion earlier and simply made him wait until the end of the argument. But he still won, and Andreas will get his reward as promised. So Bart invites him to the warehouse. The man uses movement spells on the green-haired man, which Andreas sees this time. The transport spells lead them to a vast warehouse where Andreas can choose whatever he wants. And there are many more items here than he expected. All the items here are worth more than 10 million. But Andreas' attention is drawn to the sealed sword Galaxier. He only saw this item as its name in the game, and didn't think he would find it in this storage. Andreas makes a decision instantly, but Bart asks if the guy is sure about his choice. The master of the magic tower found him in a certain dungeon. After several inspections by several craftsmen, it was found to be of no particular value. Andreas is confident in his decision. Bart says he's stubborn, just like his father. But since Andreas had already made up his mind, the topic was closed. Besides this, Bart has a letter for him from the royal state. It contains information on the affairs of the Cromwell family. The letter arrived while Andreas was in a coma, so Bart kept it for himself. And also the second letter of recommendation. It concerns the possession of swords. Since Andreas is interested in them, it would be useful for him to go to the address indicated in it. Already in the dorm, the guy studies the letters given to him by Sir Alvin, while Nickel behind him is training as usual. The letter stated that due to bad behavior, Andreas Cromwell's rank was to be reduced. Thanks to well-deserved recommendations from Alvin and many others, it was decided that this decision would be postponed until next year. This letter is of no value as it is simply a threat from the Emperor. This angers Andreas and he tears up the unnecessary piece of paper. But the second letter, which is a recommendation, interests him much more. The envelope contained a card with a letter. Bart asked Andreas to give the letter to the person who lived at the place indicated on the card. If the old man on top of the mountain finds out that the letter of recommendation was from Bart, he will definitely teach Andreas a few things. The map seems familiar to the guy. After some time of reflection, he realizes that they are talking about Dashrun IV, who retired. He is a recognized master of swords and aura. Thanks to a letter of recommendation from Bart, Andreas will be able to learn from him. And near his place of residence, there must be a secret place where you can find something interesting. The green-haired man decides to hit the road when the holidays come. And upon their arrival, as promised, Andreas sets off on his journey. And so he roams the desert with huge insects that take possession of the bones of unsuccessful travelers. Along the way, Andreas exterminates them so that they do not cause any harm to anyone. He talks about how the evolution reward he received for fighting Payat is truly enormous. Now, with the mixing of mana and aura, even his basic skills became many times stronger. The vessel skill became the perfect version of the transfer skill that Salem taught Andreas. The amount of mana and aura has increased to such an extent that alternating between them is no longer meaningful. This means that his strength is now unlikely to be running out. Andreas cuts up a freshly killed beetle in case he needs something useful. It is located on the way to the old man, Dashton. However, before heading towards it, as Andreas had planned, he would look into a hidden point in the mountains. There he will be able to get another high-class corpse. After dealing with the beetle's corpse, Andreas packs up all the useful materials. He hands them over to Nickel, who goes into the vault. And then the guy hears some loud sound. Quickly putting on his mask, he hides. The culprit of the sound turned out to be a beastman, who fell down right in front of him, exhausted. It's a leopard man, and Andreas gives him a potion to bring the leopard back to his senses. These beastmen are forced to live in remote regions due to persecution by the Emperor. Each such leopard is a skilled warrior in close combat. Andreas doesn't understand who could have brought him to this state. His thoughts are interrupted by another beetle, which the guy easily cuts in half with his sword. As far as Andreas remembers from the game, only a man named Rannox could control these bugs. His beetle army was strong enough to wipe out an entire village in half a day. He's hunting for treasure on Jester's orders. If this man and his bugs are here, he's obviously interested in something. The leopard finally comes to his senses and tells that these creatures attacked his village. Andreas understands that since it is not far from the leopard village, it means the beetles have come for the Lunapal crystal, which are kept as treasures by this people. Andreas asks the leopard to take him to his village and promises to help him, but the beastman does not accept the help right away. Even though they are in a state of emergency, bringing a stranger into the village can be risky. Andreas convinces him that if he were an enemy, he would not have helped him in the first place. The guy puts the exhausted leopard on Timur's back, and they quickly set off on their way. It seems to him that they are going in the direction Andreas needs. And then they reach a village which is right in the middle of a battle with huge beetles. Everything around is burning, and the residents are trying their best to fight back. Their village is located right in front of the cave that Andreas needs to go to. What luck! Andreas realizes that he didn't know there was a village in front of the cave. As in the game, it had already been wiped off the face of the earth. The leopard barely holds back his tears as he sees his tribe being gradually exterminated. Andreas, as promised, is going to get rid of the bugs. He uses his Necromancer skills to revive dead creatures so that they attack their living brethren. The summoning is successful, and with the help of the reanimated corpses, he makes living bombs out of them, so to speak, which explode next to the still warlike beetles. Timur and Nickel also burst into the battle. The Tiger King protects a mother and child who are trying to escape from another bug. Timur continues to deal with the creatures. At the same time, Nickel also masterfully wields a sword in order to save as many leopard people as possible. And behind the stones, the very same beetle controller is hiding. He is here on Jester's orders to search for the deadly sins and did not expect to meet any enemy. But Andreas quickly finds him and pins him to the stone with a spear. His enemy doesn't understand why he attacked him if they are both dark magicians, but Andreas quickly shuts him up. Andreas tells him what he knows about the Lunapal crystal and about the fact that a man thinks that this treasure is one of the deadly sins. He suggests that he think carefully before answering. Otherwise, he will either die or decide to take his hand. Moreover, if he remains silent for too long and refuses to speak, Andreas will also take his life. However, the interlocutor turns out to be very talkative. He gives Andreas all the information he has about the deadly sins. For this, Andreas pulls the sword out of his shoulder. He turns the pages, and all the things he sees there are new to him, except for one, which is presented as a mythical treasure from the depths of the sea. He considers this thing to be a real mortal sin. Despite the useful information, leaving such a person alive is extremely dangerous. So Andreas thanks him for the valuable information and quickly gets rid of him. He plans to take the old man's body for experiments. Besides, there's no time to babysit him, since there is little time left before the auction where the sea treasure in the form of a crown will be sold. The rampage in the leopard village finally ends, and the village chief thanks Andreas. She realizes that they won't be able to repay him properly and offers a Lunapal crystal as a reward. But Andreas refuses, saying that he is not interested. He would like to enter the cave if they would let him in, of course. The leopards immediately become hostile because Andreas, like other people, only wants their mine. With great reluctance, the head of the tribe allows Andreas to enter. The leopards don't understand how the elder could allow this, and she replies that if it weren't for him, the village would have been destroyed already. Even the mine would have been lost, so there's no point in arguing. Andreas reassures them that he didn't come for the crystals, and that he will explain everything inside to the tribe. After all, inside the cave is what he needs. Entering the cave, Andreas senses from the energy that somewhere behind the wall is the treasure he needs. The elder doesn't understand what he's talking about, because it's just a wall. Andreas asks Timur to break it. With a few strong blows, Timur breaks through the wall. The tiger warrior's strength amazes the elder. Behind the wall there is an additional cave with a huge number of green crystals, the same ones that this tribe has. The girl thought that Andreas had come for them. However, as he said, He is not interested in crystals, although he understands how valuable they are. He is interested in the giant that is in this cave, even if he turned to stone. The cheetahs don't understand why Andreas needs this petrified statue. He replies that he will leave them all the crystals and take only her. But in return, he needs them to leave him here alone for an indefinite period of time. The village chief slightly objects, as it could be dangerous, and as an elder she would like to know. But Andreas calms her down, saying that if he wanted to harm them, he would have done it long ago. The leopards, except for the elder, consider it disrespectful that Andreas did not answer the question, even though he is their savior. But the woman stops them, entering into the situation, and trusts Andreas, but asks him to honor the fact that he is the first person to whom the leopards made a promise. Finally, the necromancer is left alone. He decides to turn the giant into a ghoul since he is no longer made of flesh. This time, however, the call does not come so easily, but Andreas was prepared for it to happen. He finally gets rid of the mask, and the guy is full of confidence to make the giant his own. Time after time, he casts a primordial necromancy spell to summon the ghoul. However, it still fails time after time. He's been trying to pull it off for over a week now, but nothing's working. Andreas even thinks about giving up. But since others now know about this place, there is no guarantee that when he returns here more prepared, the giant will still be there. This time he will try to increase the amount of mana and repeat the spell. Thanks to the increased amount of mana, the ghoul summoning is successful. This is the most powerful corpse Andreas has summoned so far. Due to his enormous level, the monster regained some of his former ego. He even gained some of the traits he had before his death. The risen titan knelt before Andreas. Although with his size, he knelt over Andreas. Thanks to such an ally, Andreas no longer has to fear a large number of enemies. The head of the assembly of black magicians, sitting in his estate, is studying some book. There is a fly living in a jar on his desk, which suddenly flies into small pieces. This means that Ranax, the leader of the giant beetles, is dead. However, this is not so important to the head of the assembly, because he still has plenty of pawns. One of these just reports to Jester that His Royal Majesty wants to meet with him. And he immediately heads to this meeting? Well, here's some good news regarding mortal sin. And Andreas, in turn, finally reaches the top of the mountain where the great swordsman lives. He senses his presence and immediately asks if the Empire sent the guy. Andreas replies that he arrived on the recommendation of Duke Alvin. The old man turns around, hearing a familiar name. And so begins Andreas' first training with a real swordmaster. This is just a test of his abilities, but the old man is already putting more pressure on him than Salem. He suggested that Andreas attack him first, and he himself was going to fight him only with a stick. Andreas believes that he will definitely defeat him because the man does not take the guy seriously. However, he easily dodges every attack from Andreas and has already figured out roughly what abilities he possesses. He needs to train his fencing, as Andreas has an unconvincing fighting style and relies too much on tricks. Also, his movements are very obvious and he relies too much on speed. And lastly, Andreas does not see the enemy's intentions at all. This is all due to lack of experience. With these words, the old man knocks Andreas into the ground, and he promises him that he will become better while he trains with him. And so their days of training passed, while Andreas, with the help of a sword, tried to defeat the old man, who fought back only with a stick. All the time, they ate only potatoes. At the same time, Andreas fought with flying stumps. The training was not at all gentle, even worse than with Nickel. The man did not give Andreas any respite. On the 27th day, Andreas was already chopping stones with ease. And on the 33rd day, the old man had to exchange the stick for a real sword. He noticed that Andreas began to move better. However, he still does not rely enough on his instincts and thinks in the middle of a fight, which is too naive. The man throws Andreas back and he falls to the ground. The old man thought that the fight was over. The man had already begun to lecture about the will to fight and that he respected that trait in Andreas. But he noticed his teacher's loss of vigilance and sent the collected aura flying, even taking the old man a little by surprise. The man didn't think Andreas was good enough to use such techniques. It turns out that he did it instinctively, and this means that the talent exceeds the man's expectations. Andreas reminds the old man about his student Louis, who is also soon to enroll in the same academy as Andreas. Andreas finally comes to his senses after being knocked unconscious in the previous battle. His teacher waited for him to wake up so he could ask him a question about the sword art Andreas had used. Andreas doesn't think he could repeat it, as it was a desperate move. But in return, the teacher promises to show him how to use sword art and basic aura control skills. The first technique in sword art can be used to create flying projectiles from aura. In this case, you need to create an imaginary scabbard from the aura around the sword and launch it into flight. With such a blow, the master easily knocked down a huge tree, which once again amazed Andreas. These skills can be applied in different ways. For example, if you surround your body with an aura and stimulate it instead of a sword, then you can move at incredible speed. What the old man shows by his example. However, before learning how to use aura on his body, Andreas should master the art of the sword. And he immediately gets down to work. He does well, and the teacher praises him. Thanks to diligent training, Andreas meets the conditions for evolution. He can improve his talent in battle. Naturally, he accepts this offer. Besides, he likes this type of training more than just swinging a sword. Repeating the exercises over and over again, he achieves very good results, which surprises his teacher. The old man thinks that Andreas is even better than he initially thought, and he didn't even think that such talent still existed. His previous students, Volg, Louis, and even the unknown evil-looking man were not that skilled. If you point Andreas in the right direction, he can easily grow on his own. At this point, the old man decides to stop Andreas. He asks him to go dig up some potatoes and cook them so that they can have dinner. Thinking about how they were always eating the same potatoes, Andreas didn't immediately notice that the old man had called him his student. But when it finally dawns on him, he asks again. But the man simply refuses, even though it makes both of them happy. During the meal, Andreas is still discussing how Dashrun accepted him as a student and does not understand why. Even though he spent more than a month with him, did he achieve such great results to bear such an honorary title? Interrupting his thoughts, the man hands Andreas a book. He wrote it when he lived in these mountains. Andreas doesn't understand why Dashin is giving it to him. Taking it into his hands, the system tells Andreas that this is the book of his fencing skill, an item that can greatly increase his level, just like the book on black magic he had received as a gift earlier. Dashrun sees how Andreas has fallen silent and decides to break the silence with a joke about what must be so unpleasant for Andreas that the old man teaches him, to which the guy immediately objects. Dashrun continues that he would like to directly instruct his potential students, but this could ruin their true talent. So he gives Andreas a book that will help him find his own training method. Andreas finally admits that the swordmaster has accepted him as his apprentice after all. Dashrun ends by saying that since Andreas' training is over, he must leave these mountains, just like his teacher. Now, to keep the swordmaster's skills from becoming dull, he will head to the Southern Kingdom Alliance. Andreas says that he needs to go in a completely different direction, but he asks to take him as far as possible and finally calls the old man his teacher. A hungry unknown guy wanders alone through the forest. He falls down, exhausted, thinking about his grandfather in the village, and finds himself in the pouring rain. Andreas finds him. He recognizes the character from the game as Benjamin Anarchus. He didn't think he would meet such a game character in a completely random place. Benjamin's primary skill is the swordmaster trait, and behind his back he has a demonic sword called Rubens. For generations it had been kept in the boy's village, and if it had appeared now, it meant that the settlement had been attacked. And just like in the game, he was the only one who was able to survive and somehow escape with the sword. Andreas can't just walk by and pretend he didn't do anything. And he does this not just out of kindness, but because he cannot make such a game character not be in his debt. Andreas carries Benjamin to safety and covers him, while he makes a fire and gets food. By this time, the boy regains consciousness and sees an unknown person. He immediately becomes defensive, but Andreas simply hands him the food. Benjamin doesn't understand what the stranger is planning. Andreas assures him that he doesn't intend to harm him. The guy just needs to eat and regain his strength. He also notes that in order to carry such a large sword, which is clearly important to the boy, he needs to get much stronger and regain his strength. Benjamin remembers his grandfather and how he kept the sword sealed in their house, and this touches him very much. The boy is as emotional as Andreas remembers him from the game. He reminds Benjamin that he is still offering him food, and the boy finally accepts the invitation. Along the way, Andreas offers him a potion to help him return to normal faster. Suppressing his tears, Benjamin starts eating and thanks Andreas. But their idol is disturbed by unknown people. Andreas notices them immediately. These are the same people who attacked Benjamin's village and killed his grandfather. Andreas understands this from the boy's reaction. These people are called acolytes. They are orphans raised by Jester and are now his personal assassin squad. They remind Andreas of his past life, as he was a trained soldier just like him. Only some of them can use basic magic, When these poor orphans reach the point of mastering the aura, Jester gives them a mask that reflects their abilities. Andreas is ready to deal with them, but Benjamin jumps forward and asks his savior to stand behind him. Because the acolytes only have business with this boy, they pounce on him and demand that he give up his sword. But naturally, Benjamin is not going to do this and enters into a fight with them. Benjamin is already strong enough and copes well with such a crowd of opponents. But this doesn't impress Andreas. He even thinks about what else could be expected from the youngest character in the game. However, he is not going to leave the situation to chance, because otherwise Benjamin might get seriously hurt, as would have been the case in the plot. Therefore, Andreas also enters the fight and, with the help of his incredible speed, quickly deals with a large number of opponents. This affects not only Benjamin, but also the attackers. They switch abruptly from the boy to the green-haired youth and want to deal with him first. But they are not fit to hold a candle to Andreas. Benjamin is amazed at how easily Andreas cuts down the squad that attacked his village. And after some time, the effect of the demonic sword wears off and the guy's eyes become normal again. Andreas finishes dealing with the remaining opponents. Benjamin wonders if he could protect his village if he were that strong. Andreas brings him back to the real world, asking if the boy's okay. He looks at his savior with genuine admiration, and Andreas notices it. He finally remembers that he didn't introduce himself and says his name. The guy also introduces himself, even though Andreas already knew his name. The green-haired man asks if Benjamin has somewhere to go, but Benjamin can't answer. Andreas remembers that soon many game characters, including the aforementioned Louis, will begin to enroll in the academy, and it would be worth visiting them. At the same time, Benjamin can be taught fencing, which is what he suggests. Andreas' help doesn't stop there. He believes that Benjamin is definitely a talent, and asks him to apply for admission to the academy, and he himself will provide the boy with a letter of recommendation. But Benjamin can't afford such an expensive education because he has no money at all, but Andreas promises to cover the entire cost. This shocks Benjamin, but he now has to decide whether to agree or not. Andreas insists that he has enough funds. And once again, in a short period of time, Benjamin is brought to tears. He agrees and promises to one day repay Andreas for his kindness. Sometime later, sitting in his father's office, Andreas checks a message from Benjamin, where he says that he entered the Monas Academy and strives to become as strong as Andreas. Benjamin has entered the swordsmanship specialty, which means he will complete his studies without any problems. And Andreas, in turn, will supply him with as much money as he needs. Now it's time to think about the mortal sins. Andreas is going to participate in an auction where the treasure of the seas is being sold. So he writes to Carlos, who will also be participating in the auction. He promises to get tickets for both of them. Meanwhile, in a dark manner, one of the poor masked orphans reports to his superior that Benjamin has escaped with the demonic sword. A whole detachment was sent after him, but they still haven't returned. The head of the assembly planned to use the sword to launch mass production based on it. Because if you take the demonic sword in your hands, it enhances the magical and physical abilities of the wearer. He was looking for such characteristics to strengthen his army, but the sword slipped from his hands, which angers the head of the assembly. He gives a new order to send Hassan to the auction. Now the main goal will be the Crown of the Depths, which Andreas has also set his sights on. The head of the assembly is confident that Hassan will bring the crown even if unforeseen circumstances arise. Don't you find this face suspiciously familiar? The auction takes place in the port city of Muriel, in the largest amusement park called Night of the Flowing Gold. Andreas and Carlos are already present at the auction. Although his goal is a mortal sin, Andreas also intends to obtain other useful items. For example, the sword White Nightmare is famous for its mana conductivity. He can offer a high price for it and send it to Benjamin later. Andreas puts 20 million on the lot, and Carlos suggests that he raise it to 50, but the guy refuses, saying that the price will gradually rise. And in the end, the sword sold for 23 million, and Andreas didn't even have to overpay. The next lot is a map that many scientists have been unable to decipher. It leads to the tomb of the Red Fire Dragon. In the game, it was an Easter egg, but it turns out this place actually exists. The other auction participants are not particularly interested in the map, since deciphering it is not their specialty. But for Andreas, the dragon's corpse is very important. So he places his bid and takes the card for only 5 million. A plump man with a mustache notices Andreas and Carlos. He understands that they have a lot of money and that they are quite strong competitors. It was he who was sent to win the crown at auction. He hopes that Andreas will spend most of his money before the main lot and will not be able to compete with him. In principle, Andreas does not deny himself pleasures and buys everything he can. He takes the teleportation flower, an ancient alchemist's device in the form of a clock. Carlos even wonders if his friend got too carried away. And now it's time for the last lot. A crown called the Crown of the Lord of the Seas appears before the audience. The starting price is announced to be 1 billion. And for Andreas, this is an extremely high price. If he had the money from selling potions for the next month, he might be able to pull this lot off. But for now, he plans to provide several of his own amounts. But if the situation becomes hopeless, the guy will simply give up. And then Carlos comes to his aid. He promises Andreas to buy back this crown. The father told the eldest child of the Alvin family that Andreas tried to save them and fought in the sewers with the cultists. Andreas is surprised by how exactly Bart turned the situation around. But Carlos insists on his own and places his first lot. The mustachioed fat man is surprised that the children still have money. However, his master decided to spend as much money on the crown as was necessary, and gradually the stakes are rising more and more. Gradually they reach 10 billion, and at this point Carlos begins to feel the excitement. He decided not to waste time on trifles and raise the amount to 50 billion. Someone offers 70 billion, and Carlos beats them with 90 billion. After a few more lots, Carlos settles on the amount of 100 billion. This makes the Dark Mage's minion nervous. He is not sure whether to go further. Although the master told him to get the crown depending on how much it costs, the man thinks he should have asked how much he could spend. However, he doesn't have time to find out now. And while he is pondering his next steps, the Crown of the Seas goes to Carlos and Andreas for 100 billion. Luckily for Aleb, that's the man's name. The black magician didn't trust him very much anyway. That's why I sent Hassan after him. The man believes that Aleb would have been killed anyway if he had spent more than 100 billion. So now Hassan takes matters into his own hands and sends the unsuccessful merchant back to the Dark Magician's estate. Hassan plans to take the crown, but before that, he will let the winners enjoy the taste of victory. Carlos isn't particularly afraid of being scolded at home. Right now, he's more worried about his empty stomach, and the boys head off to a victory feast. Somewhere over dinner, Carlos tries on Andreas the crown of magnanimous greed. He thinks it looks funny on Andreas, and in principle, one can agree with him. Andreas already thinks that the assembly has not made its move in this auction. Now that they and Carlos can leave in peace, but enemies are easy to find. And just as Andreas thought about the possible danger, the doors to their dining room were knocked down. Hassan bursts in on the victors with a group of orphans. He demands to give up the crown and promises to kill the guys painlessly. Andreas recognizes the game character. Jester's top dog, Hassan the Sword Devil. So far, according to the plot, he cannot yet use the secrets of art, but he is no longer inferior to the Master of Aura in strength. Previously, Dashrun was his mentor, but they had a falling out because of Hassan's excessive arrogance. After their falling out, Devil Sword fell into the criminal underworld, where he was noticed by Jester and hired. Andreas offers Carlos an escape, but Hassan does not plan to let them go and sets a squad of masked men on the boys. Andreas and Carlos break the window and quickly run into the depths of the forest. Hassan is not disappointed with this turn of events, since he did not want to die of boredom anyway. Andreas and Carlos reach the river. Carlos suggests crossing it because now they are in a lawless land where the Emperor's authority does not apply. However, once they reach the right place, they will be able to breathe freely again and will be safe. Andreas suggests that his friend go without him. After all, it will be easier for him to escape alone. Andreas will wait until Carlos sends reinforcements to help him. When the eldest son of the house, Alvin, leaves on a boat, Andreas realizes that he can no longer hold back. The squad finally catches up with him and realizes that the crown remained with the green-haired one. He does not deny this information, but offers to take away the mortal sin if they can. This angers the masked squad, and they promise to chop Andreas into pieces. However, it is he who chops it into pieces, masterfully wielding his sword. He summons Titan for the first time to test it out in battle. Hassan is surprised to encounter a Necromancer. A massive Titan hand emerges from the vault and strikes at Hassan's minions. The masked men who survive the blow are distracted by the hand. And for a short period of time, they forget about Andreas, which is very much to his advantage. Hassan notices Andreas's special sword technique, and also high abilities in dark magic. The guy becomes interesting to him, and he finally enters the fight on his own. When asked who he is, Andreas suggests Hassan find out for himself. They start a one-on-one fight. The Devil's Sword believes that such a great weapon is wasted in Andreas' hands. Besides, the man saw his sword in some book. Now he is going to add it to his collection. Andreas calls him a hypocritical thief, which angers Hassan. After analyzing the situation, Andreas realizes that Hassan relies on the power of objects, so it is worth taking it by numerical superiority and calling all the corpses he can. This amuses his opponent. He is ready for a fight. Hassan summons the select demonic sword Ganos. With its help, he releases a huge amount of energy, and Andreas and Nickel have to block the blow, while Timur decides to go on the attack. Hassan considers the undead to be easy targets because they lack intelligence. But Nickel decides to dispel his false thoughts and attacks him from behind. Hassan notes that for a bunch of corpses, they move quite well. Andreas summons his main weapon at the moment, the corpse of that very titan. However, such a strong enemy does not frighten the opponent, and Hassan replaces his sword with a magical one that absorbs the enemy's power and transfers it to its owner. This is a great choice against the huge titan. With this, Hassan easily fights off the blow. Andreas recognizes Hassan as a tough opponent. Hassan thanks Andreas for the power he received from Titan, and the green-haired guy points the corpses of his former comrades at him. With the power it has gained, the demonic sword easily deals with them. Hassan thanks Andreas for using necromancy on his former squad. He didn't like them anyway. If Hassan hits Timur or Nikel with this force, Andreas will be in trouble. The enemy changes his sword once again, and this time he takes out the crusher from the other swords. Hassan attacks Nickel, and Andreas asks him not to get hit. Nickel obeys and tries to fight back. He and Andreas attack Hassan together, who parries both blows with two swords. Timur joins this fight and strikes. Thanks to this, Andreas and Nickel remained alive. But the skeleton lost his arm and his sword broke. Andreas is already planning to retreat or use laziness, but he is still afraid of the consequences. He asks Nickel to retreat, but he stands his ground. The skeleton requests to use Lenny instead of Andreas. The guy realizes that allowing Nickel to use laziness would be much better. After all, he is undead and cannot feel the pain that a living person feels. Hassan believes that Andreas has run out of cards up his sleeve, and it's time to end the fight. However, Nickel, with a broken sword and one arm, is already rushing towards his opponent. The skeleton has some kind of plan, and in order to bring it to life, Andreas distracts Hassan. Hassan is impressed that the mage can wield a sword, but finds his fighting style too inactive. He is already planning to send Andreas flying, but Timur protects him. This irritates the enemy, and he plans to deal with the huge cat first. But his thoughts are interrupted by a transforming skeleton. He has been imbued with the power of Lenny and is ready to strike. Hassan notes that his aura is too large for an undead person. After all the aura has accumulated, the skeleton only deals one blow, and that is with a broken sword in the air. Hassan already thought that his attack had failed. However, it turns out that Nickel used the secret art of aura and shot his energy at him. For a second, Nickel transforms into his human form in Andreas's eyes, after which he retreats back to his storage. However, Hassan survived the attack, but his sword crusher and the second Farang sword broke. That's why Timur enters the battle. He strikes one after another while Hassan tries to summon a second sword. He succeeds and wants to strike at Timur, but Andreas blocks his sword. Because of this block, Hassan opens up, and Timur deals him a direct blow, which causes enormous damage to their enemy. Andreas decides to use the technique of Old Man Dashrun and finish off Hassan with a sword without ego. Hassan notices that something has changed in his opponent. Andreas plans to kill his enemy before he has time to recover. They rush towards each other, and their collision causes a huge flash of energy. Hassan is overcome with memories and is transported back to the time of his training with Dashrun. Then the old man said that the sword in fencing is just a tool and should be thought about last. Hassan did not understand this because he believed that in a fight between two equal warriors, it was the weapon that would decide who would win. Dashrun says that he is only half right. After all, in a fight between two masters of aura, the winner will be the one who understands swordsmanship more deeply. If one of the opponents does not have sufficient fencing skills, then he can be killed with a regular parka, provided that he uses it correctly. Dashrun said that if you rely too much on tools, you can ruin all your own plans. Before his death, Hassan realizes that he should have listened more carefully to his teacher. After all, using the example of the undead with a broken sword, he still understood his words. Eventually, Hassan asks Andreas if he is Dashrun's disciple, to which the green-haired man responds positively, and Hassan confirms his suspicions because Andreas' sword smells of potatoes. These were his last words. At this time, on the other side of the river, Carlos is already preparing to send help to swim across the reservoir. But Andreas himself appears from the deep sea depths and climbs out onto the boat. He acts out that he already thought he was going to die and asks to get it out faster. Carlos wonders how he got here on his own. Andreas makes up a story about leaving his mark on the earth, and he himself swam like crazy. Carlos is angry because the opponents attacked his friend all at once. But the green-haired man reassures him, saying that the luggage is safe. And besides, Muriel is a lawless place, so there is nothing surprising about that. Carlos, however, is skeptical of all these statements. After all, among the attackers, there was a man with a huge aura. But in the end, he decides to joke, saying that he finally understood why Andreas is called a mudhead. Before Andreas set sail, he took the hand from the dead Hassan and sewed it onto Nickel in place of the lost one. After the battle ended, the chance of evolution for Nickel and Timur increased. Since Timur had a higher percentage than the skeleton, Andreas decides to use evolution on him. The process has begun, and the green-haired guy is thinking about pumping up his elemental magic upon returning home. That same night, Karen comes into Jester's possession. He is unhappy that they want to remove him from the assembly of dark magicians, and Jester himself suggested this idea. He believes that Karen is unworthy of this place, especially since he can't even handle his own student. Andreas' teacher tries to object. However, even if we don't take into account the green-haired guy himself, Karen never did anything useful for the meeting. Even by the merits of his student, the teacher is inferior. But Jester offers him another option that will allow him to stay at the meeting. Sharon is ready to do anything. Near the city of Rodlin, a magical assembly discovered the location of the ancient beast Kushane. It is a creature from the mythical era that could absorb the power of intelligent beings through evil spirits. Jester promises to give him his location, as well as the power to control him. After Karen tames this beast, he will have to bring Andreas to the meeting, to Jester in particular. Karen naturally is happy with this, since he never disliked his student anyway, and now even more so. Because of the deal with Salem, Jester asks Karen to pretend this conversation never happened. Sharon promises to do everything in his power. The next morning, Andreas returns to the academy. He conducted his research in a not very convenient place, and now he has to walk to his dorm. He wants to rest as soon as possible, but Lucia calls him. Andreas didn't answer her calls, and she accuses him of buying the tablet for beauty. Lucia immediately changes the subject, saying that a warning had been published. Now they will be able to move to a more prestigious dormitory, because an unidentified spirit was spotted in their place of residence. The fact that the spirits attacked the students means that an event with the very beast that Karen was targeting has started in the game. But according to Andreas's recollections, this event should have started much later, half a year after the start of the game. Lucia notices his gloomy expression. She asks the guy to tell her which dorm he was sent to. He was sent to Delgin. It turns out that this is also a hostel where Lucia will now live. But before heading there, Andreas decides to check how things are going in his original place of residence. Vivian volunteers to go with him, to which the guy does not object, because the girl will help him a lot. Belkin is happy that she can help, but Lucia is apparently jealous. The best girl war continues, even though they got along. Already in the dorm, Andreas asks Vivian if she has seen ghosts. The girl doesn't really know the situation, since everything is not happening in her faculty. However, she knows that Karen is investigating the case. Andreas understands that his intervention has changed the course of the game. Unexpectedly for themselves, the couple meets Diana. The girl is clearly not herself. She mumbles something about how everything is wrong. Andreas tries to bring her to her senses, but realizes that the spirits have already taken possession of the dark-haired girl. He reasons that there are two mid-bosses in the academy, one of which is Karen, and since the second person has not yet appeared in the current plot, this means that Karen has already taken possession of Kushina, and what is happening is his doing. In order to bring the possessed person to his senses, he must be told the real name of Kushina. Andreas doesn't have time to think, so he does it without any preamble. The spirit in Diana's body instantly reacts to the name, and Andreas knocks the rest of it out of the girl. Vivian catches Diana as she falls. Together with Andreas, they wait until the girl comes to her senses. Diana doesn't remember anything and doesn't understand where she is. To understand how much of herself she has, Andreas asks if the girl remembers him, to which she replies that this is a very stupid question. Green-haired tells how the girl was possessed by spirits, and Vivian adds that Andreas saved Diana. The girl says she only vaguely remembers seeing the guy, but now they need to leave the building as soon as possible. It turned out that Diana volunteered for the investigation because she was curious about spirits, and Professor Karen had asked her to do so. Andreas realizes that this was a trick to get the spirits to possess the girl. Diana was too focused on her magic and lost her vigilance, and Karen took advantage of this. The boy notices that his former teacher has become bolder. The dark-haired girl remembers that Karen was going to go in search of the main spirit. This is where Kushain is sealed, which means he needs to hurry. And Karan is already in full swing, conducting the summoning ritual. He covers the statue in which Kushan is sealed with fresh corpses, and the summoning is successful. Now, to complete the task, Karen only has to get rid of Andreas. Vivian and Andreas go to meet his former teacher. The guy thanks the girl for going with him, and she is only too happy to help Mr. Fairy. However, Andreas is unsure how good of an idea it was to take Vivian with him, as he won't be able to summon his undead. And if he says something wrong, then Vivian will find out about his connection with Karen. Andreas chalks it up to a sleepless night of mental confusion. He needs to come up with an excuse to send Vivian back. And then they come across a crowd of other students who were also possessed by evil spirits. Vivian asks if this was done by Professor Karen, and Andreas answers yes, since all these students attended his lectures. The girl does not understand why the professor would do this, but Andreas does not answer the question. He asks her to stay with the students and stop them without causing harm. There is little time left, and the green-haired man must stop Karen as soon as possible. Vivian agrees and promises to catch up with Andreas, but he would be happy if she just stayed here. At this point, Andreas is separated from Vivian, and the girl defends herself from the magical attacks of the possessed students. The guy's glad that he was able to separate from Vivian, but hopes that she won't kill the students. In any case, he should just believe in her, because it's not for nothing that Andreas trusts her so much. Meanwhile, Karen had already successfully summoned a full-fledged Kushain. He is even surprised that he can fully control such a monster. But then something attacks him from behind, and to block the attack, Karen builds a wall of bones. This is Andreas, and he is surprised that Karan was actually able to summon such a monster. The teacher did not expect to see his student here, and Andreas regrets that he was late before Kushain's call. This is too abnormally fast a time to remove the seal, and there is strange magic floating around the monster. Andreas realizes that the crystal that Jester had in the game is involved, which means he is the one behind the summoning. Karen accuses his student of daring to attack him. However, the elder Necromancer himself planned to find him soon. Andreas quips that he didn't think his teacher would be able to get to Diana, and besides, it's strange that she was deceived by a worm like him. These words make Karen angry, but he pretends that he is amused by Andreas's arrogance, and it was not for nothing that he took him as his student. Karen tells how he overheard a conversation between Morn and King Cromwell long ago. They talked about that very tree about original sin. Karen concludes that since Andreas' behavior has changed so much, it means he has obtained the item and knows how to use it. Andreas is surprised that even such an unimportant NPC as his teacher knows about the tree. The elder Necromancer demands that Andreas show him the legacy his father left him. The boy continues to joke, saying that it turns out his teacher simply decided to rob the child. Andreas summons Nickel and Timur from the vault. Karen is surprised that his student can already control high-level undead. However, as long as the teacher has crystals in his hands, he considers himself stronger. He reminds Andreas that he is still his mentor. Andreas counters this by saying that he is not a bad mentor because he didn't teach him anything at all. This still gets on Karen's nerves, and he summons his army of undead. He decides to take Andreas by numbers, especially since Kushain strengthens the creatures summoned by Karen. Andreas is ready for this fight and believes that this confrontation burns all the bridges between them. Karen accepts the challenge and announces that he intends to kill Andreas here and now and take his legacy, after which he will make the boy's corpse his slave. Meanwhile, Vivian continues to fight off the students, trying to bring them to their senses. She wants to catch up with Andreas, but even the beaten, possessed children continue to rise, and there is no end to them. They are already bleeding from her blows, but they do not come to their senses. The girl even thinks about killing them, but immediately dismisses this thought because Mr. Fairy asked her not to do it. She still skillfully defends herself from any physical or magical attacks, and suddenly remembers that Andreas used some kind of spell to bring Diana to her senses. The girl tries to remember it, but over and over again she mispronounces the word, and it doesn't work on the students. She continues to use every variation she can think of and beat up the poor students. She realizes that at this rate they might just die, even if she doesn't want them to, and she tries the last variation she can think of. She says the word Kushain, and it works. Vivian sees the changes in the students and realizes that the spell worked, and now all that remains is to beat them.